And shall we begin? All right, I now reconvene the RDI-TPA Workgroup meeting. As mentioned yesterday, workgroup members who participate remotely will need to disclose if any other individuals 18 years of age or older are present in the room at the remote location and the general nature of the member relationship with such individuals. Are there any disclosures for members attending via Zoom?
Nope.
Thank you very much. As a reminder, workgroup members who are participating via Zoom must be visible at all times on camera. Please log off Zoom if you need to leave the meeting and log in when you're ready to join the meeting. If you experience broadband or internet connectivity problems while participating in the meeting that would be remedied by joining without video, you must announce the reason for your non-appearance when you turn off your camera. We will now take roll. Reporting Secretary, will you please?
Adam Beasley.
Here.
Vanessa Brown. Here. Trisha Camarero. Kathy Krisha. Talia Diaz Catano.
Here.
Brand Duco. Vanessa Escobar.
Here.
The Estrada Revelas.
Here.
Corey Harvey. Here. Colin Paisman.
Yeah.
Alicia Herrera.
Here. Here.
Jason Morgan.
Here.
Joshua Norton.
Here.
Jimmy Odell.
Here.
Mandy Radford. Kathleen Rowley. Rebecca Sackett.
She wrote a note. I can't read it though because it's blurry.
He's here. She's here, but
She's here.
Yeah.
Tina Sloan.
Here.
Sullivan.
Here.
Walliner.
Here.
Matt Wallace. Beverly Young.
Here.
All right, now it's time to move on to 1B. This is an information item. Would any commission liaisons or staff like to address the group?
Welcome. Welcome back for day 2. Thank you so much for the great conversation yesterday. I know the commission is eager and excited. I just kept thinking of words that start with E, like excitement, eager, ... about this work. And it was really exciting. And I felt very honored at the last commission meeting to share the process and talk a little bit about some of the things that we were discussing. I think my fellow commissioners feel the same way about the excitement and anticipation of what's coming next for our February meeting. So thank you so much.
Excellent, thank you. Okay.
Good morning. Nothing to add from me. Just looking forward to revisiting some of the recommendations from last year and moving it forward.
Excellent. Go ahead. So here we have our norms. And so this is really going to be where we test out these norms together. Because today we're going to spend some time revisiting those draft recommendations. And our goal is to be able to move toward finalizing those recommendations to send to the commission. And so because these norms are going to be a critical part of that, I'm going to ask you to just entertain me. And I'm going to ask for volunteers who are willing to read them out loud. So is there someone who would be willing to read the first bullet aloud?
Present, be on time and participate. Take care of self as needed. We'll take regular breaks. Please refrain from checking email and other tabs.
That one's pretty self-explanatory. Who would like to read the next bullet?
Give and receive warm and cool feedback respectfully. We critique work and not people. Critical analysis is part of the continuous improvement process.
So what does that mean when you read that one? What does that mean to you? In other words, when we operationalize that, what does that look like?
So this isn't about the individual in the room, it's about the ideas, and when we address those ideas, whether we agree or disagree with them, do it with respect.
Thank you, Ben. Well said. Who would like to read the next bullet?
Speak your truth and seek understanding of truths that differ from yours. Embrace different perspectives, assume positive intent, take responsibility for impact.
And I think that's where the balance comes in, because as individuals, we all have our own opinions and we're passionate, and those opinions can be very strong. It's important that we balance that with understanding where we are in the process and that we're going to aim to reach consensus. And I'm grateful to Adam, who developed a survey. So if you're very passionate about something, you can indicate that in the survey. I'm not saying you can't vocalize that, but we need to be mindful of our time here together. So if you vocalize that once, we don't need to continually repeat that. The group has heard you, and if you want to emphasize your disagreement, you can indicate that in that instrument. Who would like to read the next one? Whether online or in person, go ahead.
Speak your truth and seek understanding of truths that differ from yours. Embrace a different perspective, assume positive intent, and take responsibility for impact.
Excellent. Thank you. And what about the next bullet?
Notice power dynamics. Power shows up in many different ways. Be aware of how you might be unconsciously using your privilege and power.
And that's an important reminder to all of us, right? We all operate in this world, and we need to be aware of our privilege, and we need to recognize that in this room, everyone here is an equal, and we need to ensure that we are acting accordingly. And then what about that final bullet? And whether online, go ahead.
Step up, step back, be mindful of taking too much or too little space.
So how does that one operationalize? What does it look like to be taking up too much space?
Monopolizing the conversation, speaking, too much, I guess.
Thank you, Kathy. Well said.
Or too little. Yeah, the flip side.
So we just, today is going to be the day that we're really going to test out these norms as we aim to reach consensus on those initial recommendations, which will become our final recommendations to the commission. So with that, I will go ahead and begin item 2B. So item 2B, again, we're going to work together to finalize our initial recommendation for our first focus area. And that area is modifications needed for current teaching performance assessments. So we've done some preliminary work on that already. We're going to get into our groups, and we're going to go back and we're going to review that with an eye to finalizing it. Anything that you would add?
Yes. So to kind of give you an idea of how this is structured, and building off of the chair's comments regarding sort of, this will be the first time that we take recommendations that have been workshopped in small groups and we bring them to the whole to discuss so that we can be clear about how we indicate support in the poll, right? And so that'll be good. So you have some time to revisit the focus area recommendations in order to identify some edits. Because that piece is right. This is now sort of what do you want printed on the commission agenda, in a packet, reviewed. And so this is your chance to really kind of go back to where, thank you. to go revisit focus area 1 in light of what you know now, with an abundance of time to fine tune. Then what's going to happen is you'll bring them back here. Each group is going to go and present one at a time. And we're going to open it up after each recommendation to a discussion. So that's sort of why the chair is sort of emphasizing this. Well, we're not going to be able to go down. We can note things, we can sort of bring them up, surface them, but we can't spend a ton of time. So if there are ongoing issues or support, that can be indicated in the poll. But the idea will be that, each group will go, they'll present, and you'll have a chance to discuss and learn about, figure out the degree to which you can stand behind them, the recommendations, because they will go from being particular to being that of the whole. And then there'll be a little bit of a transition there while I load everything up into the poll, come back, and I'll email you all a link to the poll. That's kind of the general process. There's been a little bit of a switch in terms of how we're gonna work this. We're gonna move to Google for this, just to kind of keep things simple. And so what you're gonna see is when you break up into your groups, and I'll share the original breakout groups that you all had when you developed these the first time. And again, we're not in the business of telling people where they can go. You can go to the group that calls you. So when you designate your recorder, send them to me, and I will make sure they have access to this shared doc. All of the recommendations are their section headers. So if you're in the cost and financial accessibility group, then you need to stay within your headers because you'll have 4 other people on the doc. And this is the text of what you created last time. And so you can, make your edits directly here. And that way I don't have to we don't have to do the email shuffle back and forth. So I will turn off access, for purposes of maintaining Bagley Keen. I will turn off access to these shared docs after our meeting. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to take all of these entries and I'm going to load them up into this poll that should be very familiar by now. And and I will send it around, and we'll if it's okay with the chair, we'll probably leave a little bit more time for those affected by the fires to weigh in on the poll, but we'll have it up and you'll be able to see kind of how things are trending. And then we're going to do it again. And then we're going to move into focus area 4 and 5 and talk a little bit about local scoring and hear from FAST. And then, so that's today.
Just a clarifying question. So in breakout rooms, we're definitely not eliminating any of the ideas. We're just tweaking language.
If that group should agree, can they?
Well, so remember
We're voting on support or not, right?
Yeah. And so that's the way we're trying to keep a really clear line of the will of the group through this entire process. And so those are recommendations that reflected the will of the group, right? You created them with reference to their support scores and synthesized them with that in mind. And so what I would say is, don't do any cutting in a small group. If there's a recommendation that doesn't carry as much weight with the will of the group, let the voting sort of suss that out.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification.
Are there any other questions on process before I either on with our colleagues online or with those in the room regarding how we're going to proceed for this part? And this is the process we're going to follow for focus area 1, 2, when the time comes 3, 4, and 5. So it'll become routine. All right. Without further ado, the folks in the cost and financial accessibility in room 151, and that will match. So when for our folks on Zoom, the breakout rooms will be labeled as such as you see here. And so for those of you that For Beverly, Lisa, Vanessa, and Rebecca, you are in the cost and financial accessibility breakout. And if you weren't in that one, because I recall during that meeting, there were a couple of mistakes in this, please just put yourself in the room you want to be in. So that is room 151, cost and financial accessibility. Room 152 is equity and accountability. And that is Alyssa, Colin, Alia, Jason. Sound about right? Is that? Formative value. That is in room 153. And that would be Juliet, Ben, Mandy, Matt, and Brent. Was that roughly the group? Just checking myself. Thank you.
And there, Lynn. I think I was. Yeah, I think you were with us. Wherever Ben is, I'm there.
So self
Sorry.
sort. So I'm gonna put Linda there. Great. Okay. Ben plus one. And then in room 158, that is this room, we have Kathleen, Kathy, Tina, Devin, and Ursula. And that is to look at the integrated educator preparation continuum. And that's one recommendation, real. So those are the groups. Are there any questions about breakout room assignments for the folks in the room or the folks online? Seeing none. Here you are. This document is in your binders. This is the handout for the item 2B. Includes, this is should be familiar now. It includes the focus area discussion and the consolidated recommendations. And that's what it matches the text that's in the Google slideshow. And so that's what you'll be working on. And once you get into your rooms, please send a recorder to me so I can give them access to the Google Slides. Yes, sir.
Have any samples of TPA? Look at the structure of it and the questions.
Yeah. So do we have, the question is, do we have, go ahead, Ben.
I have a website that I can share, at least CalTPA, that has templates that are available to people if they're interested to see. Or just Cal, I don't have that.
I have an ed TPA right now from a teacher.
I'm wondering if perhaps we can share the URL to those websites. That way, if people are in multiple groups and it's something they want to see.
Send it to me, I will send it around. If it's student work, we need to, yeah, we're not do that.
Templates and.
Like, I asked because we're trying to get recommendations on how to modify the assessment itself, which in my opinion is the biggest issue, is the assessment itself is flawed. And so to try to redesign it without actually looking at how it currently is a bit challenging. And so I feel like sometimes our recommendations are not taking into account modifying the assessment itself and what recommendations we can give to the designers. I'm glad that we started off with the public comments. My practice is before each meeting to read the public comments so I can recenter on the folks most impacted by it. And overwhelmingly, there's an issue with the assessment itself. But we need to be able to look at it. I haven't seen any templates for, besides like, that would be helpful.
Would that come back to the performance assessment design standards? Because that's what dictates what happens within the assessments.
Vanessa.
Sorry, I
That's
jumped
okay.
in.
We're gonna, hold on, Vanessa. I'm so sorry.
No, I think I jumped ahead of Vanessa.
No, that's okay. You were responding to his comment, so that was
So-
appropriate.
So I just was thinking that the performance assessment design standards is what the model sponsors use to design the assessments. So it seems like that's what we really need to pay attention to. But I guess
Yeah,
what you're,
I-
yeah.
Yeah, in practice, like even with teaching, we have standards, but how that actually plays out is much different, and sometimes there's not alignment there. So, I had one teacher, when they were doing it, made a 16-page lesson plan for the TPA. Like, who does that? A teacher would never make a 16-page lesson plan. It's just not practical. So wanting to be able to kind of look at it, what are the pieces that are kind of straying away from what we actually do in the field?
So one thing I would mention, and then I know we have Vanessa with her hand raised, is remember the scope of the recommendations or the level. It's absolutely, we'll get you something to look at, and so you can have that as a reference. And also, the work group recommendations, we're putting forward recommendations that are conceptual and interest-based in a lot of ways, because the way that that's operationalized is going to go through the commission and then staff. So there's a desire to get into it and make specific recommendations. And if you all choose to do so, that is 100% up to you, as long as it's within the charge of the work group. Just wanted to remind you that there is a life after the recommendations that is enshrined in reports to the legislature through 2018. So there's also accountability for implementing those in a way that is with fidelity. Just a reminder, though.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even in that design, I would love to see experienced educators and TPA test takers, those who pass and who haven't passed, to be invited to the table to work on that design.
Absolutely. We've got Vanessa and then Kathy. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Thank you. I just want to appreciate Jason's comment. It's something that I brought up earlier in our meetings when I asked about how much time each candidate is spending on each item, and it was very hard to determine. However, there are some candidates spending time on 20-page lesson plans and others spending time on 2. And the recommendations are to refine the design of the assessment. So that is something that we should be considering, because writing is such a big impact of and part of the assessment. And the biggest contributor to challenges is time. And so I think Jason is right in saying the design of the assessment is what everyone's complaining about and having the most challenge with. I think it's also, I appreciate you bringing it up, because I think it's very valid to say what's going on with the test that everyone's having such a big challenge with. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think while I understand there's a future after the charge, I think our recommendation has to include something to streamline the process that isn't just, well, adjust your test accordingly, according to these standards. So I want to echo what Jason is saying, and I think it's vital to continuing making this assessment worthwhile. So thanks for bringing that up, Jason.
Thank you, Vanessa. And then we have Kathy. And then
So just to put this kind of in context, because I'm on the design team. So just to kind of remember that this kind of happened in terms of, the political landscape when the design team was in the process of incorporating the new standards, according to SB 438. We were incorporating the new standards into the assessment, and so designing it in that context. And then the conversation came up about, well, are these exams valid? Are these exams a barrier? And the political will was to, consider actually getting, doing away with these exams. And then, of course, the governor and other political minds decided that, hey, maybe not so fast. So then they put this work group together to evaluate the exam. So the exam is in its pilot. We're doing field testing right now. So when those results come back, we are going to have input from the people who are taking the test, input from the people who are designing the test. And at that point, hopefully these recommendations from this work group can kind of coincide and go together. And what I will say is the good news about that is, generally speaking, a lot of this stuff tends to happen in reverse. A lot of times things get put out, they get operationalized before people have actually had time to do the full deep dive. And so we are in a pretty good position in terms of being able to make these suggestions. So, consider that, because we do need to make suggestions and we do need to understand how it's put together in order, because we're in the, our charge is to evaluate it.
And that's an excellent point, Kathy. I think with Cal-APA's lived for a while now. So it's already been through the pilot and it's been through several iterative refinements. And so when you see the outcomes, they're different. And so I'm very appreciative that you raised that point, that the TPA has already been updated and it's currently in the pilot phase. Thank you for that. Colin?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Jason's saying. And there are two different pieces to this, I think. One is this overall, the sponsors need to rethink what it is they're asking the candidates to do. And there's a need to give them some advice about what they need to rethink. It can't just be simplify it, cut it down. There needs to be some work around that. And there's a lot of misinformation. I mean, I don't know what it is for Cal-TPA, but they're not allowed to write lesson plans more than 5 pages. Right? They won't even look at, in RDI-TPA, they won't even look at anything after the 5th page. 5 pages is way too much in my view for a lesson plan. But there are those things that's the sort of nuts and bolts I think Jason was saying. Well, how can we look at this without actually knowing what the demands are, what the failings are? And whether that means everybody gets a handbook from wherever it is. There are multiple handbooks, different content areas, whatever. But the general principles are the same in each one. But I think that would help. Am I right, Jason? Is that what you were sort of intimating? Yeah.
That makes sense. So the handbook, we shared earlier on, we can definitely recirculate the handbooks because that.
Back, I want a handbook.
He wants to see the real thing.
But I mean, that gets down into the nuts and bolts of like specifications for how many pages.
I can't remember if that was the handbook of the current one that's being the pilot phase, or it's the one that's already in, yeah. So I think that is going to be something that we really need to consider, because again,
It's already been
it's already in
modified.
flux. So we really have to understand that it is currently in flux and being redesigned. So we just need to be cognizant of that.
Absolutely.
Can I ask, what specifically are you talking about? Which handbooks are being, it's not all of the RDI-TPA content area ones.
Well, Cal-TPA, we're talking about the Cal-TPA
specifically now.
Cal-TPA,
Yeah.
okay. RDI-TPA is not, I mean, it's redoing the literacy piece for elementary, but it hasn't done anything with all of the secondary handbooks,
Right.
exactly as they were 5 years ago, apart from some little tweaks here and there.
And that's the other good point, is the fact that those are coming on the Cal-TPA side as well.
And so as Kathy mentioned, it is currently in flux. And so they're just running the pilot as we speak. So we're looking at the previous iteration of the assessments, not the current piloted version. All right, Mary.
Could I just jump in for a moment? Good morning, everyone. I am going to be heading in to join you probably as soon as you break for groups, and appreciate this conversation. Appreciate the questions that are being surfaced about wanting to see get a closer view of the assessment systems themselves to see what is expected, how is it structured. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I think I mean, I completely understand that. My approach to learning about an assessment is to sign up and be trained as an assessor and go score it, because that's how I really understand what is being asked for. Are the answers compelling? Is this repetitive? What is it? That's been my way of doing it. And of course, we don't have time to put I give all of you that opportunity. And some of you maybe already had that opportunity. But all that said, I think you're making a reasonable request. And what I'd like to ask is if you can give the chairs and Adam and I a minute to figure out how we might get you the closer view that you're asking for to help you get the insight that you're seeking. Would that be reasonable?
That sounds great. We would love to have the opportunity to view those items.
Okay, well, looking forward to seeing you all soon.
All right. I don't know who was first, Tina or Vanessa? Tina, go ahead, Tina.
Oh, thank you. It doesn't matter. I wanted to just chime into this conversation. One thing I think that this work group does is we bring together a great deal of us who have widely varying experiences with this performance assessment. And I think the value of doing that is we're each bringing a different perspective to the work, and we're bringing a different level of experience to the work. And for people who have not had a chance to do close analysis of the instruments like other people have, one option that we have is to help educate one another. The second resource that we have are the commission staff who know intimately what's in the standards, what's in the tasks. And sometimes I think we put forward recommendations that are potentially already there. And it would be very helpful if staff would be able to chime in and say, here's where we have this in our standards, or here's where they exist in the handbooks. If this is not adequate, then your recommendation should be about changing it. But I think that part would be helpful. Finally, I would say that I think our charge is to make recommendations about what needs to be fixed in the whole system. It doesn't mean that we can't be intimately knowledgeable about all three of the assessment instruments that are there, but we can be more knowledgeable about the design standards, as I think Juliet brought up. And we can talk about what we have heard as being problematic in the current environment with the assessment instruments that we use, and say, here's something that needs to change. We don't know how to change it specifically, but it needs to be changed. And that's our recommendation. And then it's up to others to take that recommendation and put it in the instrument and change it. I have a final thing I'm going to say, that there are, and I think people have already said this, I think there's sort of three areas of work that we're really chiming in on. One is the assessment instrument itself that we're having this conversation around. One is the process, both the process of implementation that programs go through and the process of taking the assessment that candidates go through. And then the third thing we're chiming in on with recommendations is the use of data. There may be others I forgot, but I think it helps me to be clear in my mind when we're doing this work to think about which area we're working in.
Excellent. Thank you. Vanessa.
I really dislike going after Tina. She's so well spoken. Thank you, Tina. I think you repeated one of the things that I was going to say about recommending the design standards is what we're looking at, the design of the assessment. And I think that's what Jason is alluding to. I also want to just bring up that not intentionally, but the response was, Jason, read the handbook. And that's a lot of the things that our candidates are facing and saying, I have this challenge with the assessment. And then they're told to go look at the handbook. And we don't have time for that, nor do the candidates have time for that. So I think when we're thinking about the redesign of the assessment, these are all items that need to be considered regardless of the platform that they're taking. Because I think, sorry, Jason, I keep calling you out, but I think it's important to go back to the public comment and why we're here in the first place. And that is a response many of my residents get because they don't, some of the professors don't know about the types of feedback they can receive. And so their response is, go look at the handbook and then you'll find all the answers. And that's just not reasonable. So yeah, that was my comment. And I want to echo what Tina was saying about thinking about the actual redesign of the assessment and the implementation, which goes along with the program standards that also need to be modified and adjusted. So, Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now we have Linda, who will be followed by Jason.
Okay.
And then hopefully we'll be able to get moving in the work. Go ahead, Linda.
Thank you. So when I joined this work group and figured out what it really is, I think I was just, I don't know, just kind of confused and bothered maybe a little because we're looking at it like up here, whereas these comments are like down here. And we're looking at standards like, oh, we're gonna put out these, make these changes, whatever. But when it comes down to it, it's up to FAST right now, Cal-TPA, Ed-TPA, to take our recommendations and create an assessment based on what we're trying to do or what we're trying to revise to do. But at the same time, like, we're not able to revise we're not on the board or working for Ed-TPA, Cal-TPA, or FAST. You know what I mean? But the issues that these participants have or these test takers have is with the actual assessment itself. That's what's stressing them out. This is the platform. And when you said, I want to talk to these test takers, I'm one of them. You're looking at her. I took this test. I took the Cal-TPA and the Ed-TPA. It was a very stressful. I'm surprised my comments aren't in here, but I'm just saying is like all those little things like the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts, like the lesson planning, 5 pages. There's a limit on both Ed-TPA and Cal-TPA when, what videos can constitute condition codes. All those things are happening at the FAST, Cal-TPA, Ed-TPA level, which is these specific tests that are created by the test people. But that's not what we're doing. And to me, I thought that we would be able to say, hey, can we revise this? Can you make this test shorter? Can you take out this and do this? I mean, but we're doing it for 3 different tests. And then based on what we've been told, every recommendation that we've had or have come up with, Miss Sandy has told us it's there. Like, you can create your own test. If you don't like what the Ed-TPA, Cal-TPA, or FAST does, institutes can create their own test. Oh, they have the option too? Like, I'm suggesting why not have a portfolio option? That was something that a university can do also. I'm like, well, that's not being exercised. You don't have to pass the Cal-TPA. If your institute recommends you based on other things, you can do that too. And it's like, well, all these options were there, but it's not being exercised. It's not being operationalized, but it's done at the institute level. And how much say do we have? Because it's already an option at the institute level. You know what I mean? But institutes aren't exercising these options because there's real limitations. Like, we all said, oh, we like the idea of local scoring. It's fabulous. But then you talk to everybody at the institute and it's like, we don't have money, we don't have staff, we don't have capacity. Okay. You know what I mean? You can create your own test. Great that there's the FAST. They were able to create their own test, but not every institute wants to create their own assessment. So like, I just feel like we're still operating up here and all the complaints are like down here. And how much do we get to control how it impacts them when we're operating up here? I don't know. Am I making sense? I hope I am. Okay.
Linda, Jason.
Thank you for sharing, and I agree. The comments are, I like to start folks who are most impacted, right? The stakeholders, they're at the ground level. And one of the reasons why I did not want the handbook versus actually seeing the test is one of the things that I do as a classroom teacher is whatever assessment or assignment that I give to my students, I take it first so I can see what their experience is going to be like. And so when I'm trying to give recommendations on the assessment, I would like to just take it. And like, this question is ridiculous. Why would I do it that way? And so as I take it or I assess personally, I have more empathy and can also give better recommendations of how I would tweak it. And maybe won't be able to redesign all 3 assessments in this group, but it can better inform my recommendations that will undoubtedly be read by that group who does do the redesign. And so the handbook, gives all the explanations and things like that, but I like being able to just go through what they'll actually experience. It just gives me greater empathy and insight. Great, did have these.
Thank you, Jason.
Madam Chair would allow me to speak. Can I speak? Thank you. This is Brent Dukor, and for the recording, I'm here now, so I guess I need to be included in the role. I'm just missed the excitement, and I'm trying to catch up with it about the comments. I just read through them quickly. I was really troubled yesterday and I lost some sleep over it actually, last night about claims that were made regarding our charge. And Tina made a point about how she, I think, tries to parse out what the work is. And I think we're all trying to figure out what the work is. So I appreciated what you said, Tina, particularly around data use. Yesterday, I got the feeling that there were multiple data uses out of this work, however we define the candidate perspective. And so I just want to hold one place in thought. Can we have from the commission and or the work group around our process a way to lay out on a map of some way who the data users are and how the data will be used, how it's currently used, how it's envisioned, a kind of a flow chart? Because what I heard yesterday was this data can be used to evaluate institutions. And then I heard this data can be used to evaluate candidates. I'd like to see that written down somewhere, and I'd like to have a way to interact with it. Because as a member of this group, I'm not sure that, again, I can warrant my work in the area of evaluation of institutions and programs. So it's going to be very hard for me to participate and understand what's being done here, recommended, if that's the goal. And I'd like us to somehow, in addition to really get into those user concerns, which are deep and real, I support everything that you've all been talking about, also this idea of a future in which institutions are evaluated. So I just need to see like the mapping of that, like who are the users, what's the current concern and attempt? Because I can't think about the other issues that deeply and well if I don't know where this data is going to go.
So you missed the beginning of the meeting where we covered norms and whatnot. And so what I want to emphasize is absolutely, I'm so grateful that Mary's going to create an opportunity for us to be able to actually see those instruments as they're used by candidates and whatnot. I cannot respond to whether or not we can get that kind of a map in the moment. Today, we're looking again at our first language in our recommendations, and we're going to edit that language because today we're going to finalize our recommendations for area 1, 2, and 3. I'm sorry, 1 and 2. And so because of that, it's important for us to know that if there is something that you're stuck pondering, you can emphasize that in the survey that we're going to take. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at focus area 1. From there, we're going to take a survey. So Adam's task is to look at the results of that survey. So if he sees, oh my gosh, I see a lot of disagreement around this one recommendation, then maybe that recommendation might need to be adjusted. So that's what we're tasked with today. We're tasked to look again at our work for recommendation 1 as well as recommendation 2 and get those finalized, because if you remember our timeline is to ensure that we get those first 2 areas of recommendation to the commission for February. I don't want to put out the fire right now because I understand this is a passionate group with a lot of thoughts and ideas. However, I do want to remind us of our task for today as well. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, and then I'll to send it over to Executive Director Sandy. The focus areas, everything that we've done has been based on the exact statute that was authorized by the legislature. So the exact language of what we're looking at is, it's up top of every deck. And I would just encourage you to spend some time, looking at it and thinking about the exact language of it. All of the activities that we have done have been designed directly on that. Your brainstorm ideas that became consolidated ideas, all in response to that. So if you're ever wondering sort of, okay, well, where's this coming from? It all comes from the statutes that are cited in all of it. So I just wanted to put that back out there and then hand it off to Executive Director Sandy.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Adam, for previewing a comment that I was going to make. Essentially, Brent, I appreciate the question that you're raising about what are the uses of these data and where is that written down? And it is written down in 44320.2 and 0.4. I believe in point 3, well, at least point 2. In any event, now I've gone deep inside baseball, but we did provide a kind of blown up version of kind of point by point what is in this statute. And within this language, you can see quite clearly that data from performance assessments have 3 purposes as outlined in the statute. One is to inform a recommendation for somebody to earn a credential. 2 is to inform accreditation. And 3 is to support technical assistance for programs with low pass rates. That 3rd item was added in Senate Bill 1263 this year. So those are 3 broad foci for data. And I think that some of the information that was provided at the last meeting, and I believe by Fifi and team yesterday, dug a little deeper into where are some of these data collected and kept for reference, and how are the data being used by accreditation teams. We got deep into that system, I believe, between the last meeting and today. We've gotten as deep as we can, given the constraints of 2-day meetings and this kind of work. But happy to discuss that more fully. And Adam is gifted in many ways, but flowcharts and things are one of his true gifts. So we could task him with drawing us some really nice pictures to help us really get concrete about how performance assessments are expected by the legislature. Legislatures since the 1998 bill, Senate Bill 2042, envisioned this, and it's been pretty steady presence in our statutes for now going on almost 30 years. So. But it is the opportunity for this group and the expectation that this group is going to take the hard look that you're taking. The time frame that was provided in statute for this work group is short enough to require that you focus on the policy frame for how it's designed, the ways in which what are the design features that are identifiable by you as you conduct this review that need to be reconsidered. But the longer term work of implementing recommendations from this group, as Adam, I think, mentioned earlier, that will go to the commission, and a work plan will be developed this summer, I would imagine, once those recommendations are finalized, that will go deeply into how do we engage in the next iterations of this work, so that we have fidelity with the law and are moving forward with the recommendations of this group as adopted by the commission. So anyway, thank you.
All right. So on that note, we will get started with the first area.
You all remember where you're going? You want me to put that back up? All right, so we have in room 151, cost and financial accessibility. Beverly, Elisa, Vanessa, Rebecca. Did I say your name wrong? Did I pronounce your name wrong?
And just one to choose, but also in 2 spaces, but.
Yes, I noticed it. I was like, I was gonna say.
Alyssa, Colin, Talia, and Jason in room 152. Juliet, Ben, Mandy, Matt, Brent, and Linda in room 153. Kathleen, Kathy, Tina, Devin, and Ursula here in this room. Tori, you can
Was in that one.
go ahead. It's okay. All right, and then please do send me your recorders so that I can give them access to that doc, Google Slides.
We get started. We start as soon as we get in.
Adam,
Do we need for the transition?
Yeah, probably.
About 10 minutes for the transition.
And I think Shane asked.
Yes.
I'm not on the list. Am I, is there a room that I'm recommended to go into, or should I just choose?
You can choose. I would say room 151 or 152 could use another person.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Adam, I was in 152 last time. So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm planning to head back in there.
That sounds good.
Okay, great.
Okay, we will go ahead and reconvene. Thank you so much for the time and thought that you put into refining your initial recommendations. So which group would we like to begin?
So first up in the hopper, we have cost and financial accessibility. And just as a reminder, in terms of process, I'm your clicker, so you could just say next slide as you need it. And please, would stop after each recommendation to give members a chance to ask questions. And then we're going to do the voting of the poll at the end of each focus area. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Can I just make a request?
Sure.
I'd like to look at these with the eyes that the CTC, the commission board will. So I'd request that no one defend or explain anything until like everyone's read and has their own mind made up about what it means. Does that make sense? I just don't want a group jumping in and saying, oh yeah, we wrote this because, you see what I'm saying?
You say it again?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, like typically in the past, groups have presented what they have. I want to be able to read this without an explanation about why, because that's how the commission, like the board is going to read it.
Sure.
So the explanation on why and whatnot could be after.
Okay.
But intent is so important, and sometimes hearing the intent can change the lens in which I read.
They just present it cold.
Present it cold, let us have a chance to read it, and then if there's conversation where it's like, oh no, we intended it.
Does that sound like an okay process? Present cold, pause for people to read. We'll kind of look, and when heads pop up, then we can begin it.
I would add one suggestion. After presented and after you're done reading it, if you could vertical, then we'll know that you're ready. Share for the cost and financial.
I can do it.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
So I'll read it and then pause as we discuss. The RDI-TPA Workgroup recommends that the state of California create a specific loan or grant program to fund candidate TPA fees. If the candidate qualifies and serves as a teacher in California for a certain number of years, the award becomes a grant. If the student does not teach in California for the identified period, the award will be treated as a loan and must be repaid. This recommendation is necessary because the assessment fees can be a burden and a barrier for credential candidates. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this barrier by covering the immediate cost while preliminary credential candidates are students and incentivizing remaining in the profession.
Done, Brent.
You're not the person.
All right. All right, we're ready to.
Number 2. All right.
We're gonna.
Slide. Or are we discussing?
Any discussion on this?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So my question is for candidates who do not pass, not that I ever want that to happen, but like 3 times, get condition coded once. What happens with the loan or grant or years of service? Is there any implications, or are all submissions covered no matter what? Like, that was the only thing that kind of came to mind when I was reading it.
That's a great point.
Thank you for that question. We didn't discuss that, but Beverly has an idea.
I was just going to say that the recommendation is for the general concept that the actual operational details and everything else, I think would take a lot more discussion and like details of, specific situations. I don't think we have the bandwidth here to get into all the specific recommendations, but I think what you're raising is an important one to be considered, but I think that's down the line.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions about that particular item before we move along? All right, let's move along.
Recommendation number 2, the RDI-TPA Workgroup recommends that a defined period be created between TPA submission and before TPA scoring begins to review candidate submissions, identify those that have scoring issues, and allow students to resubmit without incurring additional costs. This recommendation is necessary because currently too many submissions are returned with condition codes that may be easily corrected and don't reflect the candidate's skill or ability to demonstrate mastery of the TPEs. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by reducing the number of non-scorable submissions and reducing excessive costs to credential candidates.
Questions or comments about this one?
Can I just give a thumbs up?
Absolutely. All right.
I'm sorry, I should have spoken up on recommendation 1. I was keeping my mouth shut. I can't anymore. Just because of being at an institution that has its own, that is also facing significant financial issues. I'm wondering if there's some way that, one of the things is that we don't require our candidates to pay. And so in some ways it feels like, okay, well, candidates other places are getting funds to offset those costs. Could candidates at a place like Fresno State, could those funds then go to the institution to fund their TPA? And that might then also incentivize other institutions to develop their own models. So
So where would we capture that?
So the friendly amendments edits totally fine in real time. But I mean, if we're talking about sort of down the road, what the things happen after that, really the point of the discussion is so that you can indicate your consensus at the end of it. Right. And so if not having that takes you from a strongly support to a support, then that's a good data point. And remember, we're going to also have, and I would also, take some notes, because once these come back from the commission, we're only sending 2 focus areas. Then we have another bite at the apple to sit with the whole set of recommendations and think about what do we want to send forward as draft. Right. So there's always a kind of a recursive element to it. So I would say the purpose is just to clarify here and offer friendly amendments where it's just fine tuning.
I appreciate that you shared that comment. Thank you for that. Ben?
And then there's just a process question. So I now recall that I think many of the themes end up repeating across on this one. Many of the themes end up repeating across areas, which means strongly agree when we do the rating. So my question is, like, are we consolidating today as well, or are all these going to go regardless of repetitiveness? Does that make sense? Like that exact one is in our group as well. You know what I mean? It's worded differently.
I hadn't thought of that, to be quite honest.
Maybe what we can do is keep notes on those that are repeated.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we can make a decision with what we will do with those.
Sounds good.
I'll just say if they are repeated, then that just means the commission gets that recommendation twice. And so I think that would then signal to them, that would signal something to them.
The other way we could handle it is we could just make that clear in the presentation. That you're going to see some repetition and that,
Emphasizes.
that's an exclamation point. Cool.
Repetition.
Brent and then online. Go ahead, Brent.
Beverly, this is Brent. I think that would also signal consensus building So it's not just repetition, it's actually, there seems to be a consensus around certain key or core elements of recommendations, and they're cutting across multiple domains. Kind of just what you said.
Beverly?
Just a quick first thanks to Brent for saying this is Brent, and just a quick reminder, if everybody could start that way by saying who's speaking when you're in the room, it would be super helpful, at least to me. Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder, Beverly. All right, let's move along.
All right. Number 3, the RDI-TPA Workgroup recommends that the CTC examine the current credential program standards, in particular Standard 5, to evaluate the implementation practices of the TPA, the IDP, and the ILP, and the original guidelines for such implementation, and identify where original guidelines need to be enforced, revised, and/or additional guidelines created to reflect current needs. This recommendation is necessary because solutions to issues currently identified may be due in part to flawed or inconsistent implementation. It will also address the candidate's experience of the TPA as a disconnected, high-stakes demand with little impact on their actual professional practice. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to ensure program accountability, thereby reassuring the public and the professional community that the TPA is a critical part of teachers' career-long learning progression and reducing financial costs for candidates.
Questions or comments on this one?
IDP.
IDP?
Visual development plan. So it's, it's what you create with intern. Sorry, this is Ben. It's what you create with intern to consider how to continue. Which then goes into the ILP for extension.
Okay.
That happens with all candidates.
One language, I guess this is Patricia Camarino, after current needs, just current needs of candidates. I don't know, I think reading that first, current needs, I'm assuming it's candidates, but it doesn't specifically say.
Excellent, thank you. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. So the thought is that students are having trouble with or unsuccessful experiences with the TPA because the design has not been implemented appropriately. And when you review the actual standards, credential program standards, there's language in there that's already created to support successful completion. And if we are not implementing appropriately at first, that's incurring more costs for our candidates down the road because they're not successful the first time. Some are not, right? So that by increasing fidelity and our appropriate implementation from the beginning, students will have a better experience and will have fewer needs to retest.
Thank you. And we have an additional comment from Alyssa Brown.
Lisa and Rebecca totally hit it.
Perfect.
Is to reduce the amount of the cost of retaking for unsuccessful candidates.
Excellent. Great question, Brent.
Yeah, it's my turn.
Yes.
This is Patricia, maybe current financial need of candidates. I just like maybe put a financial piece in that paragraph to kind of clearly just like explain like it's a financial need is what we're looking at. That's it.
You hear that, Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. All right, let's move along to the next one.
We're done.
Hey, great job, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca.
And now we will move on to the equity and accountability group, and who will be the speaker for that group? Thank you, Jason.
The next slide. We created headings for all of ours. So equity and culturally responsive sustaining practices. The revisions are in the red. That wasn't clear. So the RDI-TPA work group recommends that TPA center culturally responsive / sustaining and equity focused pedagogy by requiring candidates to incorporate culturally sustaining practices that are directly responsive to the backgrounds, identities, and cultures of their students and communities in their learning context. Requiring candidates to design and deliver equitable learning opportunities that address systemic / institutional barriers to ensure accessibility for diverse student populations, including multilingual learners, students with exceptional different abilities, and historically underserved groups. The required candidates piece was at the top, but we felt that it was not, we didn't want it to get lost. So that's why requiring candidates repeated for each bullet. To demonstrate asset-based pedagogical approaches that value and build upon students' strengths, experiences, and community assets / knowledge as central to their teaching practices. Requiring candidates to disaggregate and analyze student data, for example, by race and ethnicity, language proficiency, and exceptional needs, to inform instructional practice to provide a high-quality educational experience. We were not able to change the bottom 2 lines, but we want to do that. I did update the font size, so it should be big. So we believe this recommendation is necessary because of the inequities that exist within our current system, but there are other reasons why it's necessary. We did not get to that because Adam was telling to hurry up. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to explicitly address the inequity that we know exists in the data of our.
Question.
Questions.
Sorry. If I have a question, then I leave mine horizontal, right? Yes. Okay, I'm horizontal. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
All right, thank you. So, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but right now the language is requiring, whereas currently on the TPA, it's optional. Is that the difference? Or am I saying this whole thing? I'm sorry.
No, it's not there for some of this.
It's not there. So you're saying now it's required.
Yeah.
So like,
Suggesting that it should be required. Some of it is not there. Some of it is addressed, but not explicitly.
Okay.
And so now we're trying to address it explicitly. I think that's what we.
If I may, in response. Are you done? I'm sorry.
no, I guess my example is to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, like, for example, like on one of the TPAs, that you have to have a student, or you should have a student with ELL, but if you don't, then you can opt out of it. So now you're saying it's required, like you have to have a student with this, you have to have a student with disability, you have to address those students. No, misunderstanding. Okay, thank you. Please clarify.
No, we're not. Much more general in terms of the lesson planning itself, rather than choosing the focal students.
Okay.
We're
So
not
for
changing that bit. We weren't.
For example, if they're doing a text that reflects their student population or the overall general community population, that sort of thing.
I think this is a really good example of setting policy, right? Because there is some, when you look at the Cal TPA, if you recall the president, there are some aspects. Please tell me if am I speaking out of truth? Marissa says that I'm on here. So, there are some aspects that address some of these this. But in setting recommendations that become policy, that becomes the standard for all that are part of it.
Devin.
Another clarifying question. So are you suggesting that these be added to the existing? My question comes from wondering if building more on top of what already exists, or asking candidates to do additional things rather than add it to existing TPA in addition to everything that candidates are required.
Based on recommendations that and so the center that
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. The sound keeps cutting in and out.
Same. There's something wrong.
Give us 1 second. Let me switch our Wi-Fi.
that was Jason speaking. Sorry.
You don't want to make the phone call that I made and ask, who is that when Mary's speaking?
Okay, try now.
All right.
Okay, and then just I'm going to echo Beverly's reminder. It is so helpful for us if we know who's speaking. So if you could remember to say your name right before you speak.
Jason Morgan, testing 1, 2, mic check.
Thank you.
We can hear you now.
Excellent.
So I don't think the recommendation is saying either way to add or take away. Like in the overall design, personally, I believe it should be streamlined. But there might be elements that out and more so make sure that this is
We're losing you again.
culturally sustaining practices.
Can you hear him now?
Can you hear me?
Use your teacher voice.
Humbly.
It's not a you thing, it's a connection thing. You disappear completely. So sorry.
We need you to enunciate for this corner.
All right.
Thank you.
I do mumble.
Thank you.
Right.
We're not getting any sound anymore.
Oh. Sound?
It's not about the teacher voice or projection. It's just the Wi-Fi is cutting in and out. So you'll sound like robots and stuff.
Fires may be affecting those.
Testing. How about now?
Can you hear us now? I'm seeing thumbs up.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Wonderful.
Can you,
Just a minute. Can you see us now?
so sensitive. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Or the switch the camera.
Speaking is for. Federal legislation, yes. A good time to take a lunch. This is
Not quite, not quite.
I heard about the lunch break. That sounds good. That's all I heard though.
Okay, if you can hear us, give us a thumbs up. And if you,
Started.
and if you can see us, give us a thumbs up. All right,
Thank you.
so we will move along to the next slide.
Did that answer your question, Deb?
Yeah.
I'll had her hand raised for the last one.
All right, go ahead, Alicia. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
You can't unmute.
You give her.
Is there like a permission?
Can you type it in the chat feature?
Oh, okay. I'm not sure because of the technical difficulties if it was already answered in the room, but I was wondering what about the text in the last one suggested that there would be extra work by having equity and accountability, culturally sustaining and relevant practices. Did that get discussed?
Jason, would you like to respond to that?
No, Jason answered it, but someone posed the question saying, what about the language? Would there be extra work? Or I'm in the group with Jason, so I'm wondering what about the language suggested that there would be extra work?
This is Devin. I was the one that posed the question. And
Yeah.
Question comes from the statements requiring candidates to do those things. The listing of all. That's why I posed the question, but Lisa responded. It was answered.
Okay, so it's so is there anything that could be added that would just drive home that it's about the framing versus increasing tasks? I guess would be the thing in terms of wordsmithing, that's all.
Any thoughts from the group on how they might refine that language a little bit in order to emphasize the framing?
That's all.
This is Julie. I think it's there with the language that TPAs center. Unless it would be center culturally responsive, sustaining and equity focused pedagogy within the required tasks by.
Perhaps adding within the required tasks might help.
Okay. Thank you.
I was going to say, can we also maybe add it where it says this recommendation is necessary because of the inequities that exist within our current system without adding more work? Do we need to put that in there? I'm just asking.
Well, and I know we kind of define exceptional needs, but I did want to add gifted because I know we've talked about it before. Because it will under that realm, what is exceptional needs?
Did you hear Patricia's comment?
Okay, that's Patricia. At the bottom. Gifted. The thing is so IEPs and 504s are like legislation versus gifted is more of an identifier, but I think it still needs to be considered under the exceptional umbrella because those are just, students who require differentiation in a different.
Your thoughts or comments on this before we move on to the next one? All right, next item. Slide, I would say next slide.
So because the revised, but we after the commission. We can't make additions without the group looking at it. So.
Right.
We already did this one.
No, that's. The revisions on the next slide. This is accountability for equity and disproportionality. The RDI-TPA workgroup recommends a system of shared accountability between preparation programs and TPA providers for addressing disproportionate TPA success rates. TPA providers are required to research and publish findings on inequities, particularly by race and ethnicity, in order to redesign the assessment and support programs in reducing these disparities, but not limited to providing recommendations. This recommendation is necessary because evidence shows that candidates from underrepresented groups face systemic barriers and inequities with the TPA itself, contribute to lower success rates, which TPA providers have a responsibility to address, perpetuates inequities in the teaching. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address these disparities by fostering transparency, providing actionable data, programs, and outcomes for all.
Right? Any questions or comments on this slide? Oh, wait, there we go. Vanessa.
Who would create this system? Is my question. Who would be responsible for creating the system of shared accountability? Would it be the CTC? Would it be the institutions? Who? Yeah, that's my question.
Talk about collaboration. Recommendation was how can we area of collaboration?
Or should it say something like the CTC should facilitate a system of accountability?
I would have also added that, like, including but not limited to providing recommendations to programs. Usually that would come from like CTC in my experience, as opposed to like the person, right? So I think there's a couple of things where CTC would be involved, I would imagine.
That was Patricia, Ursula, and then Benjamin.
I'm so sorry. Thank you.
So this is Ursula. The suggestion was to add a qualifier at the beginning to say that the CTC would facilitate a system of shared accountability. And then the additional idea from Benjamin was, can you repeat it, Benjamin?
Yeah, where it says including but not limited to providing recommendations to programs. Just in my experience, that usually comes from CTC and not Pearson. So I imagine CTC has a couple of different ways they'd be involved.
And then Patricia?
I was just gonna say, I had mentioned earlier about, we had talked in our group about just collaboration. I do like the facilitator idea, but I think we were also looking at how can we get the providers of the TPA and the preparation programs to collaborate more in their discussions instead of having to bring like the CTC in, or maybe even it's all three of them in a collaboration of systems. Or yeah, I mean that can help provide guidance, because like the main thing is we are having these, as you know, candidates not passing, and these candidates are of color or candidates of other different abilities. So how can we help them overcome these barriers to be successful?
And
those teachers in the classroom.
And the reason why I say the CTC would facilitate a system of shared accountability is because CTC pays for why I figure if they're paying for it, then they would bear the responsibility during that system exists. Any other?
Do we add that group consensus to the?
Yeah, if the friendly amendment makes sense to you, then you can add it directly. Slides, and I like this because I don't have to type under pressure, and it's.
We'll give Jason just a moment to make those adjustments.
I just ask a question. Are all of these recommendations aimed at the CTC? I'm not quite sure why.
They are, but
At the start of this statement, we need to add the CTC. We're not adding that to.
It's because someone asked a question, who would be responsible for creating that system? That question was posed previously. And so we're suggesting that the CTC would be responsible.
No, I get that. The bit I'm confused about is we didn't say with some of the others, the CTC will ensure, or the CTC?
I think it's,
We've left that as a given because that's who this is going to.
I think this is just to provide, to emphasize that clarity.
Okay.
Because we don't have time to wordsmith it to death right now. So that's just a quick fix.
Okay.
Thank you. Vanessa?
I was just going to say, many of the program standards that are already written are not followed through because of the nuances of the language. So I want to make sure that we're really clear on who is responsible for making sure this is happening within our recommendations.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good.
Yeah, our group didn't have a particular, like, who would sign it, but if the whole group is fine with putting CTC, that works for us. Jason, Morgan.
There an additional slide? Right.
3 more. But we ran out of time, so it's not gonna be much different than before. The RDI-TPA work group recommends assessor training to prioritize evaluating candidate knowledge, what they can do, over penalizing problematic errors and revise scoring practices to focus on what can be assessed without the use of condition codes. Additionally, assessors should receive training to deepen their knowledge of the specific competencies and contexts they are assessing, including areas like culturally responsive teaching and ethnic studies. This recommendation is necessary because rigid scoring practices, limited content knowledge, and condition codes often penalize candidates unfairly, diverting attention from core teaching competencies. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by ensuring a fairer and more accurate evaluation of candidates, emphasizing substantive teaching skills over superficial compliance. Oops.
Still thinking it through.
I still have a question about this. Lisa, this is Lisa. Are we doing questions now? Yeah, the question is just, thinking about this and, with equity and accountability, something in here that I'm just like, I'm thinking that assessor training is also something to reduce like scoring bias. And I'm just wondering, I mean, it's not called out specifically, but does it? So that's where I was getting tripped up on. I was just continually thinking about why assessor training would be necessary in there. And if it is necessary, I mean, there is a call out to culture responsive teaching and ethnic studies. So I guess it's kind of like, that is, but that was my question.
Thank you. Patricia, did you have a question or comment? Okay, good. Any other questions or comments? All right, on to the next.
The candidate support. The RDI-TPA workgroup recommends including a reflection question in the TPA to gather candidate feedback on the support they received in their prep program. This recommendation is necessary because understanding candidates' perspectives can identify gaps in preparation and inform improvements in both teacher preparation programs and the TPA itself. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address alignment issues by using candidate feedback as a means of improving the implementation of the TPA and accountability for TPA providers and preparation practices to ensure better support for future candidates.
I'm wondering, can we emphasize that question be asked before they complete the TPA, like at the very beginning? because as it currently stands, we only hear from those who pass because it's not in that place currently.
So there
It was meant to be for everyone because one of the issues was you only heard from the folks who passed.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying like when they open the portal, pose that question.
Yeah, so we're the difference between program and maybe Fifi, you could help us here. Program completer surveys are completed by people who pass programs and therefore have passed the TPA. Cal TPA does do a survey after you complete the actual assessment. It is on the last item. You'll be able to see it today, kind of take a look at it. And so that'll be, yeah. So just so you're aware that it does exist.
Thank you for the
And
clarification.
it asked them about the support they received. Okay.
Julie, did you have something?
Sorry, in the part that was added today, right where you're typing, Jason, accountability for TPA providers. Is it TPA providers or program providers?
Model sponsors.
Well, but is it really accountability of the model
programs.
sponsor?
It's the
I think it's
programs.
accountability of the program.
Programs. It's the
And so
programs.
that was my question. I wanted to clarify that language.
I believe because we do the TPA. The idea was the TPA providers are also getting that feedback to.
So who is the TPA provider?
Pearson or.
Is that what?
TPA, yeah, or Fresno State, yeah.
Okay. Or CTCs. Okay.
And that it
Yeah.
captures it as you meant it, correct, Jason?
I was understanding this recommendation to be about,
The quality of
The
support they
support from the
received in their
program.
program.
right, so it didn't seem like it should be accountability for the model sponsor.
So that's a point of clarification. Are you asking how they were supported by, for example, Pearson? Or are you asking how they were supported in their program of preparation?
It's supposed to be support from their prep programs. I think the second there was inform improvements in both teacher preparation programs and the TPA itself. So somehow using the feedback to improve the TPA.
Okay, and is that the way it reads?
That part makes sense to me. It's the accountability for TPA providers. That
Is the accountability for TPA providers or is it for TPA providers and their preparation programs?
It was for both, but grammatically, it reads weird.
Well, let's fix that language.
60-second revisions.
Let's
Just to
take
add-
a moment to adjust that language here now. That way we know that it's gonna move.
could it just be changed to be accountability for TPA model sponsors and program provider and
program providers.
Actually, I actually liked it the way it was before because when you're having participant, this is Linda, if you're having participants answer a questionnaire about their prep, wouldn't you also want the questionnaire to include the process of the TPA itself so that Pearson can take the recommendation?
The process that they've experienced is in their preparation program. So for example, if they're attending the RCOE program, their experience might be different than say at Fresno State where. So that's why I think Juliet is posing that question. Dan?
I don't really want to do like a distraction real quick, but I just quick question. So they do survey results at the end, like Cal TPA. Do programs get those?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. I've only been in the role for about a year and I don't remember seeing them yet. So that's why I was asking.
So again, the point would just to clarify, if we can kind of massage, figure out when we want to end this friendly amendment so that we can, but in terms of Linda, if you're feeling like that would feed into how you indicate support for this recommendation based on that. And then there's also more chances down the line.
Excellent. Brent, and then we'll be ready to move on. Go ahead, Brent.
Hi, this is Brent. Jason, I just heard you, I think, say out loud that you were interested in this particular recommendation to address how candidates might provide feedback on the actual TPA itself. Is that right? You slipped that in verbally, I thought, but it's not in the written part here. So were you interested in this recommendation to give candidates an opportunity for say something to the example, which parts of this examination were difficult for you to understand or comprehend? Did you want that in the spirit of this recommendation, or is that not a concern?
The original, this actually was one of my, maybe someone made a recommendation off of something that I shared. But it was just kind of thinking through, we wanted programs to be accountable for providing support. And so just getting feedback, well, what support did you have from all candidates? So program completers and non-completers, just to get, if as a program provider, if you understand, okay, they're going to be asked what support they're getting, it just helps with ensuring their support. I think prep programs are already trying to give them support, but that feedback will provide that support for them. Somehow that recommendation got put into this overarching category. And so the wordsmithing is from the collective group, where again, we're talking about trying to improve the TPA as well through this feedback. But it wasn't part of the original spirit of it. That's just kind of like where it went. And then the last pieces were very limited on time.
Also, just to note,
Yeah, we appreciate the collective reasoning from the group and any changes.
Excellent.
also just to note, we are, one of the things that you'll leave here with is homework, and that is on questions, survey questions for program completers, questions for program completers, or questions for assessment completers. So in terms of getting into the detail or drilling down in this aspect, we will be taking that up next.
Excellent. All right, let's move it right along.
And yeah, we did not get to the last one. So it's the same, focusing on candidate readiness. The RDI-TPA workgroup recommends positioning the TPA as one of multiple measures of candidate readiness, allowing candidates to demonstrate mastery through additional coursework or approved assessments or implementing UDL principles. This recommendation is necessary because relying solely on the TPA may not fully capture a candidate's readiness, especially when considering diverse preparation pathways, candidates with learning differences, and individual strengths. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by providing a more comprehensive and equitable evaluation framework, ensuring candidates have multiple avenues to demonstrate their teaching competencies.
Did you have a question or comment on this one? Linda, did you have a question or comment on this one?
Oh, no, I'm still stuck on the other one, but I'm okay.
Right. And we will move on to formative value. And presenting on formative value, we have, yes.
Good question.
Sure.
If there's no, it doesn't fit in any of the categories, is there an opportunity to make recommendations about things like trimming the fat, like recommending that overhaul of the?
I think that absolutely. So what we're sending to the commission is their initial recommendations in the spirit of this is what we're initially thinking, so that we can start to engage the commission in getting their feedback. But then after that, absolutely, focus area 1, just those design pieces, or, if there's a desire to provide a recommendation around sort of limiting the the impact or the footprint, or, you know, that's totally acceptable part of it.
Tina.
Hi, sorry, I had a question about the previous one. I didn't click my thing fast enough. This one here, always my understanding, and I believe it is in the standards, is that the TPA in standards is just one of multiple measures of candidate readiness. Programs currently have to identify which assessments they use to cover all of the TPEs, where candidates practice something, where they're introduced, where they practice, and where they're assessed. They cannot get a credential without passing the TPA and passing all of the assessments in a program that determines that they pass the program and get a credential. So I wanted to know what is different here.
I believe, so we just kind of clustered the recommendations that were being made. This wasn't my original recommendation, so if anyone.
I can speak to that. This is Patricia. I think for our group, looking at, and I just can't help but think about yesterday. So like the TPA itself, I feel has been used as the main measure, right? Like I hear what you're saying, Tina, like if that wasn't the purpose or the design of it, it was to meet these multiple things. So I guess for us, if the student did not pass the TPA and they're highly qualified, what else can they do to demonstrate that mastery of knowledge? And so looking at a portfolio, and in looking at this now, I'd like to take out additional coursework, because I think, the idea would be, hey, you've done enough coursework, but maybe a portfolio to show of the work you've done. In that way, the TPA is not just the sole, again, maybe that's not the purpose, but that's what I'm hearing, that's what it's kind of been, is that sole thing that you have to do in order to pass. Yeah, but that helped, Tina. I don't know if that helped or not.
Well, in the sense that I think maybe I'm understanding that it's certainly one thing that has to be passed in addition to a program. And so you're saying the primary purpose of this is to have additional measures of candidate readiness included in the process? And is that like the secondary standard that currently exists, or something different?
Well, and then we kind of talked, I forget what group I was with yesterday, but they talked about that secondary passing and how the candidates have to score within different realms in order to even qualify for that. But what if the student or the candidate just doesn't pass at all? No, but they demonstrate that they've done well at everything else. So I guess that's kind of what I'm talking about, I should say.
Okay.
Vanessa and then Rebecca.
Thank you. This makes me think of one of my comments that I made earlier, where this recommendation is kind of already outlined in Program Standard 5A, Administration of the TPA, and it feels like what we're looking for is more of an accountability measure than allowing TPA as one of multiple measures, because the TPA is already one of multiple measures outlined in the program standards, but the program standards doesn't really go further than that. And that's kind of the challenge that I'm understanding right now of this recommendation.
And so I would remind the group will vet itself out in the survey, right? So if, you all feel strongly about that, be sure that you know what is the correct marking for that, Adam?
And you can, if that takes you from a support to a neutral, or a neutral to an opposed, then indicate that.
Jason, Morgan, I get insight. This was based on a work group member's recommendation that said, expand the secondary passing rate to allow additional measures to demonstrate mastery. So I think the intent was to expand upon what's already in existence for passing.
Makes sense. Thank you. And then Rebecca.
I really appreciate a lot of elements of this. And Vanessa, I appreciate the fact that this is already, and Tina, this is already in the design probably. But I appreciate that it's explicitly calling out students with learning disabilities, or I can't find it right now. Students with disabilities or learning differences and individual strengths. So I just wanted to say a call out for, I appreciate that's in there, and maybe I need to read the standards to see how well that's called out. And I really appreciate calling out UDL. I wanted to say yay for that, but then I was sitting here thinking, well, if it was UDL, we wouldn't be having this as the only option. So I don't know what to do about that. But so as far as our group is able to say, push forward that like, hey, it's really important that we are making sure our workforce is inclusive also of people whose brains don't show up in the way that this test is designed. And what are we going to do about that? So I don't know. I don't have the answer, but.
One more. Thank you, Rebecca. And we've got Colin and then Patricia.
Yeah, that was what I was similar to what I was going to say, is that was, I think, the underlying reasoning behind this. And I don't know why we never included that opening statement about broadening out the other ways, the passing standard route. But that was certainly what the intention was that we need to take account of the candidates that are actually completing this and their needs and their differences. And this was a way of doing that, was to say, okay, is it 3 points? You know, I mean, we've reduced it down by 3 points, but maybe for some candidates it needs to be justifiable that it's actually 5 points or 10 points or whatever that might be. And that isn't really our job to say what it was, but that was the aim of this particular recommendation, was to broaden that out, broaden the ways of passing out, making sure that it wasn't, because it really is one of the only things that stops them being, if there's a piece of coursework they get a C on, then they pass, right? So it's one of the things that really is the stumbling block, particularly for students who come from very diverse backgrounds.
Excellent. Colin, Patricia. And then after that, we need to move. Go ahead, Patricia.
I was just gonna add to all that and looking at candidates whose writings may not be the same as other writers because they come from an underserved community themselves. And again, looking at being beginning teachers, sometimes we start with not the best grammar or not the best dialect, but yet we can still demonstrate that mastery in what we do. So looking at just, again, if the whole system was designed to be using multiple measures, and just maybe reiterating that to the commission because of whatever reasons. Oh,
that's okay. Just a reminder, we've standing between us and lunch, we've got other groups.
And initial recommendations.
And you can parse that out in your survey. Yeah, Ben, and then we're gonna move.
I just worry that how it sits right now may not get certain votes, but if the purpose is UDL, it's gonna get downvoted and not be on the thing going to the commission because it's going to get downvoted because it's not the heart of. Does that make sense?
Not to me right now. Not to me right now, but I differences of opinion.
Just ask a process question about this survey, because I think that might help some of the conversation. In the past, the surveys have been strongly agree, I wonder if it would be possible in this survey to possibly have like a comment at the end that maybe would get to some of these concerns. Like, I would have voted strongly agree if it had a lot or something.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted.
Great. That might help.
We'll add a comment section. Just gonna add one at the end if that's okay. So like keep your notes then.
Thank you. All right, now we are ready to move on to formative value. Who will present for formative value? Right. Brent. All right, Ben, you're on.
So we got 6. We will go through them one at a time. RDI-TPA Workgroup recommends that programs must provide substantive, same thing, differentiated and individualized ongoing feedback on both pedagogy and submission criteria to candidates throughout the TPA process to guide the candidate's development of the TPA. And is that okay, or do you want to go all the way through all of them?
That's fine.
I think that's fine. We will move on to the next.
Recommendation 2. We recommend that the TPA assessors provide rubric-specific feedback that highlight the exact criteria met and not met. TPA assessors will also provide clear and actionable next steps within 3 weeks of the submission deadline, not generic feedback.
Tina,
What's meant by actionable next steps?
This has been, so in terms of conversation, one of the number one things that we saw in terms of like candidate responses, and this came up a number of times today, was getting results but not knowing what to do with them. So what's meant by next steps is providing the candidates an idea of what to do next so they can be successful.
On the reason I ask is because if it's the assessor may not have any connection to the program that the candidate is in. And it seems like the next steps have to take place within the program. Are they recommending next steps?
Thank you. Good question. So one of the things that we ended up talking about is certain areas of the rubric have multi-criteria that you don't necessarily even know which criteria is the one that has failed. So just more clear communication so that the candidate can be best supported. That could be that highlighted rubric as an example would really help even a program, to your point, support that candidate. So something that provides actionable next steps to the candidate and the program. Yes. Does that answer your question?
Beverly. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tina. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm good.
Well, I'll continue in Tina's question, I think, because I had the same thought. I like the intent of this. I think this is good, but I'm also confused a little bit about the assessors providing clear and actionable next steps that are not generic. Because I think of the assessor who might have no connection to the candidate or to the program, and their next steps might be something like resubmit part 3 or, rework this or, something that by necessity might be generic. And so I'm not sure who the right person is to give those next steps. But if you don't want just generic, I can see this just being like the assessors will just have a form that will click certain next steps that will result in generic feedback. And so I just think that's a little problematic. And maybe as a general recommendation, as I said earlier, the logistics of how it works out might be later on in the process. But maybe we address it by saying TPA assessors or program staff will provide clear and actionable, something that we can ensure that it won't be generic feedback, that it really is an improvement over what they get now.
So hold on. So that is a recommendation, is that it say program sponsor or institutional staff or program staff is.
Sorry,
Hold on,
Yes.
she's next.
but I'm also a person who's presenting for this group.
Okay, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Tina and, this is Brent, Tina and Beverly, I think you raise a really good concern. And I think it's interesting to hear the concern in the context of the way in which I think we discussed in our group this particular approach. We do, in later recommendations, talk about program responsibilities for feedback. But what we're trying to figure out is how to make the formative value for the TPA score useful to the candidate. So the problem is how to make 2 parts of this puzzle. One is the programs providing feedback, the other is the actual TPA. That's based on comments that we read aloud to each other from people who've taken it. The big packet you gave us of handwritten notes of what people said it's meant. Generic feedback continued to be the criticism and concern from the users. So we're trying to solve the puzzle of how to make the TPA scores more accountable to something other than generic feedback based on exactly what the user experience has been. That was part of the spirit of this particular recommendation. Thanks. Sorry.
I'm just gonna kind of reiterate that during the process of this being in its pilot and field testing phase, when we talk about, because that's one of the things that the design team is talking exactly about in terms of how does the rubric inform the next step for the candidate? What is the feedback on these rubric sections? And again, you know, this is a great recommendation because that's going to inform that when we get that feedback back. Because we, you know, do have some surveys that are going to go out to the candidates and to the programs after they take the TPA and tell us, you know, what do they need or how we can make that. But we just know that, again, this is going to go into one of those design features, I think. I think this is going to end up in that particular bucket.
And if I could echo back to Kathy, thank you so much. This is Brent again, because I think this goes to the heart of the design of the instrument itself. There are flaws, and part of the flaws have been, as candidates tell us, I don't really know what exactly my next steps are. The other question would be, I think, for the group, alignment. Wouldn't you want alignment between the summative assessor's evaluation and feedback and the programs? And if there's not a commitment from the summative assessor, tell us what they think the next steps are, and we could be shooting in the dark about what's next for the candidate. We want to make sure there's some cohesion and alignment. I think that's the other spirit of this.
All right. We will move along. Tina, go ahead.
So I just want to, I got to say, we got to get to a point to where, and I understand that this is tough and we're in a tension point, but we have to get to a point where we can say, okay, I have enough information to cast my initial score with feedback. And down the road, I know I will have a second bite at this apple because we also, after lunch, which we now need to shorten, and I'm just being the pain in the butt, right? Like the ninth grade. So after lunch, we also need to get the embedding done so that we can have this item to the commission. So these are just some practical considerations. There's absolutely time in the future. We're gonna have other chances to move this to draft, and then another chance to move it to final form, informed by the feedback from the commission. So sorry.
I can do my comment in the survey then.
You.
I will take and appreciate ninth grade teachers. Just wondering about the role of the IDP in this conversation. That's all.
I love that. Yeah.
All right. Moving right along.
Recommendation 3. We recommend that the TPAs allow candidates to use the feedback received to revise and resubmit individual sections of the TPA that they failed as many times as necessary to achieve a passing score.
This is Devin. A question on this. So what if all the rubric scores receive, for example, Cal TPA a 2? It's not passed. Do they select
For secondary passing at that point, right?
Straight
2s?
It's 15.
Passing on
15. Have to be 17 or above.
Yeah, yeah.
So would they get to select the rubric area just to say my score for different rubric areas?
We did not consider, but
just curious.
I think it's a good point.
Right.
Recommendation 4. We recommend that programs score their candidates TPA. So this is a return to local score.
Beverly?
Question.
You're on mute, hon.
I put my hand up for the previous one, but I have a comment about this one too. On the previous one, allowing candidates to retake as many times as necessary. I think with the caution as to the assessment's psychometric values of validity and reliability, what that does and how that impacts the assessment as a whole needs to be taken into account. And that's like down the road. On this one, so that's my comment on 3. On 4, everybody likes local scoring. I do too. The programs score their own TPAs, but I think that logistics and the viability of such a recommendation, I think a lot of programs would prefer that, but it's just not, they just don't have the personnel and the staff when they're a program that recommends, 800 to 1,000 or more candidates a year. They cannot entirely score their candidates' TPAs by themselves. So just the practicality of this, I think we have to figure that language in somehow.
Thank you, Beverly. Next.
I just had a question. So this would entail no options apart from in-house scoring.
This was just, we weren't removing anything that was already submitted, so this was one of the repeated recommendations that we included, and it could be up or down voted.
Also, the subject of an entire focus area. So
yeah.
All right, moving it right along.
Recommendation 5, we recommend that candidates be able to submit their initial TPA or TPA resubmission within 2 weeks when a technical or logistical issue leads to TPA failure or receipt of condition codes.
Be the responsibility of the TPA program.
So, well, the candidate would have to resubmit, but it's based off tech codes or condition codes where, yeah, if there's something they can resubmit and get a score faster, essentially.
So just a logistical point on this one in terms of there are submission cycles that need to be considered. So, we have to figure that part out. Just want to make sure that that's mentioned.
I think that's what this is Juliet. I think that's part of what we were trying to address.
Excellent. All right, moving right along.
Last one. We recommend that programs support, I'm going to rephrase it, programs must support candidates with reflective activities based on the feedback provided on the TPA to further the candidate's ongoing growth and development regardless of pass or fail. Which is in line with like IDP.
All right. Now we will present Integrated Educator Preparation Continuum. And presenting for that group is Tina Sloan.
Okay, the RDI-TPA Workgroup recommends that the CTC develop a continuum of practice from pre-service through in-service. The continuum should integrate TPEs through CSTPs to capture the trajectory of pre-service through in-service practice to the skills and behaviors that lead to successful student learning and to a successful teaching career. We recommend that there is an exploration of the connection between the TPA rubrics and this continuum of practice so that the continuum would guide the connection between the TPAs and the ILP and help candidates and mentors know where the practice demonstrated on the TPA falls on the continuum. This recommendation is necessary because at this time, a continuum does not exist that integrates the TPEs with the CSTPs, which causes a breakdown in understanding the full spectrum of teachers' development. This continuum would ensure that a pre-service program's curriculum and tasks, including the TPEs and TPA, align with the expectations at the end of the program, as well as the expectations of the induction programs. This recommendation is intended to address this by ensuring that the TPA rubrics are aligned more closely with the continuum so that it would be easier for candidates and mentors to develop growth plans within pre-service and in-service practice.
Jason?
Jason, in this model, would candidates still be able to proceed in their career if they did not pass a TPA?
What do you mean receive in their career?
Proceed.
Oh, proceed
So
in their
that-
career.
Yeah, if it's a continuum, back on where I'm strong.
Well, they wouldn't be able to continue their career in a public school with a license if they have not completed all requirements for the license.
Basically,
Yeah, I didn't know if this was saying that now would be able to.
basically, it's a continuum. What it does is it plots the TPA on a continuum, beginning, new teacher beginning about the induction phase. So the very nature of that is to understand, okay, this is informative because it's on a continuum practice over.
Only thing that we could consider, and that's why we talk about the conceptualization of the continuum is, or, you know, the TPA being able to inform that continuum. So that, you know, the intent would for it to be not as much of a barrier. I mean, obviously, we're restricted by statute to a certain extent, but to make sure that this is more formative, you know, this is operationalized more formative, like it was originally. We're talking about the development and growth of a teacher through their induction, from pre-service to induction, to make that connection explicit and to ensure that the feedback loop is continuous.
And I think there's a grammatical thing. The second sentence, I think, should read the continuum should integrate TPEs and CSTPs, not through CSTPs.
Brent, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi Tina, this is Brent. So I'm just curious, we talked about earlier, people mentioned things like logistics, how would we carry this through, this recommendation sounds very good in paper, but what does it look like? Do you envision, or do you have a way of articulating, are there existing continua of practice that the state or the commission or others could rely upon to even understand how to link?
Yeah, good question, Brent.
Thanks.
So there is the new CSTPs were just adopted in April of this year by the commission, and there is a continuum of practice around the CSTPs in development that has yet to be adopted. My understanding is it's based on if people have seen the prior continuum of practice for CSTPs. So that exists and will exist, a new one. And then TPEs are aligned with CSTPs. So it's a question then of understanding how the continuum would show TPEs and CSTPs along a scale of sophistication of practice, so that candidates and mentors could look at a candidate's practice wherever they are and say, this is evidence for being approximately here on the continuum, which is where you should be. You're in a preparation program, or etc.
Thank you. Understanding the TPA's place in that.
Right. Currently, candidates will get a score on a rubric, a TPA rubric. I got a 4. Where do I fall on a TPE?
You know,
I just wanted to say, I take back this is Adam, sorry. I take back my previous comment about I'm going to put one feedback section. It sounds like there's a desire to provide feedback at a annual level. So I'll put an optional feedback box for each item.
Thank you.
We're going to push you a little hard here. I hope I hope that's okay. We need to be back here at 12:35. That's a quick lunch. Are there any objections to that?
Is the last.
That is it. That's it.
All right, returning at 12:35. I'm gonna run
Push
again.
through to focus area 2.
You know what? Hold on. Let's call for public comments really quickly and then we will break. So it is now time for public comment. We will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to make a comment, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card or by clicking on the raised hand icon if participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes. Are there any public comments?
No public comment.
Thank you. The public comment period for this item is now closed. See you at 12:35.
And the poll will be in your email inboxes.
Like for responding to the poll.
There we go.
All right, we will go ahead and begin. So now moving on to item 3B, which is the revision of focus area 2 recommendations. Do we have a presentation?
Yes, we do. So the focus area 2 recommendation. So this is about embedding. It follows the exact same process that we just did. So you have the same type of document. The recommendations are in there, organized in the same way. That's going to be familiar. We have a Google slide deck, which will function just like the last one did. You'll have some time to take a look, revisit, and then identify any edits or fixes that you want to make. You'll bring them back here, and then we'll go through as we did in the last round. So what we'd like to do is take 12:35 to 1:15 for your initial. We'll check in at 1 in case you finish earlier. Check in multiple times. I'll be around, but let's say 1:15. We'll stick with 1:15. That's fine. And that's the activity. Again, once you designate your recorder, send them to me or flag me down. I'll be walking the halls with the laptop and able to punch in your email and send you the link immediately. And we will be doing the same process, and then there will be a poll. You don't have to finish the poll today. The poll will be open for a week-ish. And so there will also be feedback. You can provide feedback on any of the recommendations. In terms of the rooms, so these are the assignments I had from last time. So they don't note who may be switched last time we did this. So for the folks that were in scaffolding and sequencing tasks, okay, that's my word I can't pronounce today. You'll be in room 151, and that's Lisa, Kathleen, Mandy, Talia, and Vanessa. Want to give you a moment to sort of write that down, room 151. That'll be the virtual room 151, as well as the physical room 151. For faculty implementation, we have Beverly, Juliet, Colin, Matt, Devin, Alicia, Brent, and that is in room 152. The physical room 152 and the virtual room 152. Give you a moment to note your name. In room 153, TPA flexibility to improve embedding. We have Ben, Kathy, Joshua, Tori. 153. And in systems alignment and collaboration, we have Tina, Patricia, Jason, Ursula, and Rebecca. And that's room 158. Systems alignment and collaboration. Take a moment to write down your room. Again, we are not in the business of telling work group members where they need to go. So if you see somewhere else you'd like to jump in, that is 100% okay. And flag us down. I just want to remind that we have resources here. We have the team from CTC, and oh yeah, you can't hide. And they're able to, if you have questions, technical questions, anything that you need to sort of to modify your recommendations, they will be floating and are available to you. So are there any questions before we break?
All right.
All right.
We will reconvene at 1. Adam will be circulating to see when you're done.
For 1:15.
Go ahead and head out.
The 20,000.
20,000. That's just in the Palisades. That's the city.
All right, let's go ahead and reconvene. So I'm gonna get us started with this comment, okay, which is, ooh,
Yeah, there's
an echo in here.
Yes.
That's an important your comment.
Oh. So you all know that we covered our norms, and one of those norms is we do not personalize the work. In order to ensure, and Colin, we are finished on time, I am now taking off my friendly hat and I'm gonna put on my facilitator hat. Which means I am not gonna entertain any shenanigans. We've got to move this train forward. And that is my charge, is to ensure that we move this train forward. So if somebody should suggest an idea and I hear you say, I was gonna say the same thing because blah, 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 I'm gonna cut you off. Because there is no need to do that at this moment in time. There's no need to reiterate what has already been said. So with that,
Our norms.
we've already covered those and you weren't here when we covered them.
Oh, wow. I really.
That is qualitative.
Move it away.
It's going.
Do that, Brett. That's the dangerous zone to get in. With that, let's go ahead and get this started. So we will begin with A, scaffolding and sequencing tasks. And who is presenting on that for us?
I'll read it out loud. Recommendation number 1, the RDI-TPA work group recommends streamlining the TPA exam structure by reducing the number of pages submitted, streamlining rubric instructions, eliminating duplicative activities, and incorporating contextualized real-world teaching scenarios so that candidates can focus on demonstrating their competencies without navigating unnecessary complexity. This recommendation is necessary because the time spent on the current expectations of the TPA, which are overwhelming to candidates, high stakes, duplicative, and some of their nature. Reducing the navigational workload allows the assessment to become more authentic as it is contextualized in real-world teaching contexts.
Right? Moving right along.
Recommendation number 2, the RDI-TPA work group recommends that the TPA allow for multiple modalities for submission components. This recommendation is necessary because the expected writing components can be overwhelming for candidates and cause a barrier that creates inequity and racial bias, as well as unnecessary stress. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address the multiple types of learners that exist among teacher candidates. Multiple modalities will address many of the current codes and barriers that prohibit candidates from completing the TPA. This allows for accessibility.
I'm sorry, I thought we were gonna have clarify. Can I go back one or no? We trying to say.
The train's already left the station. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Away from
I
him.
had a clarifying question. Can someone maybe elaborate on the contextualized real world teaching scenarios? So I have a better understanding of what.
Yeah, I think, check and make sure. I think the intention behind that is to help further align what teacher candidates are doing in their programs to what's happening and when they're in their programs in the TPA and also within their classrooms, like to help further alignment of the TPA should be something that is real world for you tomorrow in your class, while you're going through your program. That it's not something extraneous or it's separate. So kind of like try to find language around making a bridge or making it together.
Thank you. Sorry. Back.
Alicia?
Oh, no, that's in you.
You're still on mute.
You can unmute. Yeah, unmute.
Thank you. If I recall, there were comments that said that the things that were submitted for TPA were created specifically for TPA, and that if they could use the lessons that they were actually using in their clinical practice or in their actual coursework, and that they could align those real things that they were doing more closely, and that could be done more intentionally, that would feel less redundant. And so that would be something that should be more intentionally considered going forward. So that there wouldn't be something called like a TPA lesson plan and then a real lesson plan, that these would be the same thing, if that answers your question. That's what that. Okay.
Thank you, Alicia. Hi. Any questions or comments regarding this next recommendation that we just reviewed? Right. Move it right along.
Okay, recommendation number 3, the RDI-TPA work group recommends that the TPA be broken into multiple segments with TPEs specified that are contained within existing coursework and reflected in the program standards. Coursework that is assigned and evaluated by faculty should be used for the TPA submission. The intent of this recommendation is not to expand coursework or programs, but to revise learning outcomes in the coursework to align with the TPEs and the TPA. This recommendation is necessary because current TPA practices cause overwhelming stress for teacher candidates and are duplicative in nature due to the inability to submit coursework. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to reduce the overall stress experienced by the candidate, provide more opportunity for prompt feedback and continuous improvement, develop authentic and meaningful growth opportunities for candidates, and eliminate duplicative experiences.
Could you clarify then, am I reading this right, that what you're saying is that I could get someone to write some lesson plans in my history C&I class. I could give them feedback on those plans and they amend those plans, and those are the plans they would then put in their TPA. Okay, thank you. Really good idea in my view.
Beverly?
2 comments. I appreciate the intent of this. I don't think we can go as far as recommending that it be broken into segments. I think we have to recommend that be examined for impact on the psychometrics of the exam, the validity and reliability, and how that could be impacted, because those things are all carefully studied when exams put together. And the second one about coursework that's assigned by faculty can be used for TPA. I think that's good too in terms of trying to avoid duplication, but I think we have to be very careful here of walking a line that makes it seem that we could cross over where the state begins dictating the actual coursework assignments and so on that are part of a program, because outcomes can be dictated and mandated, but the actual curriculum, whether it's K-12 or university, is the prerogative of the faculty, and we don't want to cross a line into the state now dictating curriculum. So I think we have to be very careful with how we word this. I don't think the wording now says that, but I see a getting close to a cliff there. So I just want us to be mindful of that and careful.
Thank you, Beverly. All right. Let's move on to the next item. Program implementation, and our presenter on program implementation is who's a part of that group. Don't look away from me and not make eye contact.
I can go ahead and do it. Thank you, Julie. So our first recommendation, and I made a last minute edit here. We grappled with some things regarding local scoring. So that is, we recommend that work be done to identify barriers and necessary resources to enable programs to score their own candidates' TPAs. Related to that, exploring ways to incentivize programs to engage in local scoring. And then we also said programs participate in ongoing CTC sponsored statewide moderation, sampling calibration, and cross-fertilization in what works in scoring and feedback. This recommendation is necessary because localized scoring increases programs' opportunities to engage with the quality of their candidate submissions. Local scorers have better knowledge of their specific context in which the candidates are teaching. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by requiring programs to engage in scoring their candidate submissions as a way to learn more specifically about the program's areas of strength and areas.
Kathy, you okay or? All right. We will move on to the next item.
Okay, so the next one is a 1A that just uses all the information from, it's just copied from the last one. We grappled with whether or not we could require programs to score their candidate submissions or a subset of their candidate submissions, or have them score the TPA resubmissions. And so just put that as its own item. We'll put that vote on, comment on.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Does that make sense? Does that represent it appropriately? But
I see, it looks like there's a couple questions out there.
I'm okay.
You're okay? Okay.
I'm okay.
Right, hearing no questions, we will move on.
Okay, and the work group recommends that programs use the data from the TPA to engage in programmatic continuous improvement, including alignment of academic program with TPA cycles and tasks. Recommendation is necessary because TPAs provide data on what candidates have learned and are able to apply in their teaching to address equity and disproportionality in results. Many programs may not be aligned with TPA tasks. Many candidates express that coursework in TPA tasks seem duplicative. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by requiring programs to directly engage with the data on their candidate submissions.
Right, let's move on to the next item.
That's when programs be required to provide candidates scaffolded and sequenced feedback on their work throughout the process prior to submission, and current guidelines for acceptable support be examined and revised to ensure the entire process be formative and educative. This recommendation is necessary because candidates need formative feedback on the various components of the tasks in order to reflect on and develop their praxis prior to submission. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by requiring programs to provide feedback to candidates throughout the process to guide their ongoing development and their preparation of their final submission.
All right, move on to the next one. All right, we will move on to TPA flexibility to improve embedding, and the presenter for that is Trisha, Kathy. Okay, go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, so recommendation 1, the RDI-TPA work group recommends that program standard 5 includes embedding the TPA in both fieldwork and coursework with the option to use the TPA templates for these assignments. As part of embedding the TPA in fieldwork, candidates will receive and implement feedback on their teaching and be assessed on their implementation of feedback. This recommendation is necessary to enable programs to prepare candidates to address local and contextual factors and align with program methodologies.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
Recommendation 2, the RDI-TPA workgroup recommends that candidates have opportunities to submit evidence for the TPA using multiple modalities, audio, visual, written, and collect multiple points of evidence for their teaching. This recommendation is necessary to make the assessment more accessible and equitable for all candidates.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
Recommendation 3, the RDI-TPA workgroup recommends that a portion of the TPA be locally scored and that the TPA model sponsors provide resources to train and support institutions to score a portion of the assessment. Portion of the assessment could be interpreted to indicate one task of the TPA or percentage of candidate submissions. In accreditation, programs will demonstrate how they are using data from local scoring to inform continuous improvement for the institution. This recommendation is necessary to ensure that programs study their program's impact on candidate practice.
Brilliant, Tina.
Beverly and then Tina. And are you okay, Colin? Are you still?
No, sorry, I'm stretching.
Okay.
I just have a clarifying question. Recommends a portion of the TPA. Do you mean a portion of the assessment itself, or do you mean a portion of the candidates taking the assessment be locally scored? So is it everybody has one element of the TPA locally scored, or that some people have their entire TPA locally scored?
That part was open into interpretation. It could indicate one task, everybody has one task that is locally scored, or it could be a percentage of your candidates are scored. So that part is, we put that intentionally open-ended.
Okay.
I was on that team, so I'm going to respond. Also, it was in considering that a lot of concerns was that this institutes might not have the capacity to score all of theirs. So we're saying at least a portion of it.
Right. And who is that speaking?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Linda. Hi, Beth.
Oh, okay, hi, Linda. Thank you.
All right, Tina.
I have a comment about this section in general, and I wondered the extent to which the work group here thought about requiring the assessment instrument itself to change in order to be more flexible to local conditions. In other words, for instance, somewhere down the road, would the assessments be reconfigured, not just reconfigured, but redone, so that there was a portion, for instance, of the assessment that could be shaped more to a local assignment that was important to a program? And I don't know exactly how that is and how that would work. I just remember in the early days of developing PACT, we had a local, we had elements of the exam had local assessments that were designed by the programs, and we had a different ways that we were trying to figure this out. We used common rubrics across programs, but designed our own tasks to those rubrics, for instance. Or there was some assessments that a group of programs designed that met their particular local needs and the kinds of things that they wanted to push. But it meant that there was at least a portion of the TPA that was both highly contextualized and to some extent broadened to be standardized across places. Did you all talk about something like that, or did you think you needed to keep within the confines of the current TPAs as they stand?
So I think, well, I was thinking at any rate, and we talked about it a little bit, but I think, again, it's in that open-ended part about portion of the assessment. What you're talking about, Tina, is getting into the design of the TPA, which we are not, that's not our purview at this point. But I think when we talk about the open-ended, a portion of the assessment could be interpreted to indicate one task of the TPA or percentage of candidate submissions. I think this is going to overlap, I think, with some of the other recommendations that may lead to that discussion of possibly enabling that. But again, we get into the issue of capacity, of various capacities of various institutions to do precisely that. And then also to just, again, understanding that within the statute, it is, the statute is trying to say, how are these candidates ready? Because you may have to exclude something that is that specifically localized in order for licensure.
I just wanted to comment that this recommendation 3 looks to me like it's about assessment, not about the tasks or the assessment instrument, but about scoring.
You say that's accurate?
I'd say, yeah. But again, if you look at the open-ended of the portion of the assessment, and if we start talking about design issues, then that obviously changes the complexity of that particular. I think our original intent when we talked about this recommendation was looking at the data and the local scoring and making sure that, the programs understand fully the impact that they have on their candidates.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just meant in this category as a whole, flexibility in the TPA. Did you all consider asking for changes to the current instruments so that there was a piece of them?
Well, they did know, because that's really not within our purview, at least the charge of this work group. We tried to stick to the charge at hand, at least.
I don't know. Is it? I guess that's a good question. Is it not?
Sorry, I'm happy to. I think what we can't do is make recommendations for how a vendor might operationalize the performance assessment design standards, but we can definitely make recommendations about the performance. And we can definitely make recommendations and will be to make recommendations about making local scoring more viable. And in such a scenario, I think that how can the instrument itself facilitate?
Yeah, so I think we can make recommendations for a future date. I mean, it doesn't
I would
need.
agree. I think for where we are at this moment in time, I think this might be sufficient, but when we come back around again, consider it. And additionally, you can note that an instrument for that particular survey item, she can indicate this acceptable if.
Well, there's also, I'm sorry we're also in item 4B today, just to preview a little bit. We're going to be talking about local scoring implementation. We'll start with the performance assessment design standards, and then we'll ask FAST to share information. And we're also, one of the things we're asking is for folks that have had experience in the evolution of the TPA and development of local scoring to kind of share ideas. So this is in many ways, I think apropos to this item in terms of future consideration, and also anticipating our local scoring discussion and should be held on to.
And by the same token, I want to honor and respect the work of this group. As we started out the meeting, we said everyone in this group equal, and we're conscientious about our privilege and whatnot. And so I just want to recognize that in this moment that the group did not consider that at that moment in time, and that's okay.
I'm not making a criticism here at all. I want to make a clarification about what are the recommendations and how far can we go? Because I have heard a lot from the field that the that the assessments are too big, that they're taking up too much space, that they're hard to implement. And are we able to make recommendations about the instruments themselves?
We are limited as a work group only by our charge and what is in statute. So those are our guardrails, and within statute and our charge. And I see Executive Director Sandy has her hand up. I think it would be appropriate. I would defer to my co-staff on the project, Mary Sandy.
Mary? You're muted. You're still muted. Hold on a second. They're trying to unmute you, I think.
Brilliant. Hi, everybody. I think the whole purpose of this is to review the design and implementation of performance assessments. And I think the questions you're raising, are right on point with respect to design, and the question of embedding, and the question of design goes to issues of size and scope, and viability and feasibility within the context of a program. So I think you're asking a question in the abstract, but I, for one, would be really interested in hearing what recommendations you might want to make in under the heading of is this within our scope? I think the group itself, over the course of the next, couple months, while you're devising, refining, and finalizing, can work from whatever's on the table. But right now, I think it seems to me very much not problematic for you to talk about this and put some ideas on the table. As I was listening to the conversation a moment ago, I thought there might be some confusion or I thought your question might be about whether the issues we're discussing are about embedding or about design. And really, it's kind of a continuum. Whatever you design has to be embeddable according to the statute. So I think these things are not completely mutually exclusive, but if you've got thoughts that need to go here, it would be good to get them into circulation.
Any other comments or questions on this particular item before we move to the next slide? Okay, then let's move on.
Recommendation 4, the RDI-TPA work group recommends that the CTC or model sponsors collect exemplary practices for embedding the TPA from preparation programs and regularly provide these practices to programs. This recommendation is necessary to ensure programs understand the multiple ways they can support candidates through embedding the assessment.
All right, let's move it along.
And so the implementation of the previous recommendations is intended to, 1, ensure that programs embed the assessment in ways that are formative for candidates and are responsive to local and institutional contexts. 2, provide candidates with multiple equitable opportunities to demonstrate the breadth of their teaching. 3, ensure that programs understand candidate practice and use data from the practice for continuous program improvement.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that. And moving along to D, system alignment and collaboration presented by Patricia.
Next slide, please. System alignment and collaboration recommendation number 1, the RDI-TPA work group recommends that the CTC convene regular statewide gatherings of the entire preparation community, teacher prep program faculty, assessment designers, LEA administrators, mentor teachers, candidates, scorers, etc., to engage in a multi-directional feedback and collaborative learning that informs teacher preparation programs, LEAs, and the assessment itself. This recommendation is necessary because the current practice lacks sufficient stakeholder perspectives and scope of improvement. Diverse collaboration is essential for fostering continuous improvement in both program practices and assessment design, ensuring alignment with real-world teaching and equity-focused practices. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by creating structured opportunities for stakeholders to review current practices, identify gaps in alignment between the TPA and prep programs, analyze recent assessment results, including both quantitative and qualitative data, collaborate performance expectations and scoring to ensure consistency and fairness across evaluators, share effective practices, and collaboratively develop strategies to improve the TPA, its integration into teacher prep programs, and the LEA clinical experiences. Facilitate meaningful contributions from all community members, ensuring diverse perspectives are incorporated into continuous improvement efforts. Item. Recommendation 2 is the RDI-TPA work group recommends that teacher preparation educators and LEA administrators and teachers collaboratively engage in TPA data review and analysis for the candidates they work. This recommendation is necessary to foster mutual responsibility for candidate development and success, ensuring that both preparation programs and school-based practitioners are aligned in supporting candidates effectively. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address a disconnect that currently exists between IHEs, LEAs, CLE programs, and school-based practitioners by creating authentic opportunities to collaboratively review TPA data, inform practices in teacher preparation programs, and enhance the instructional practices that credential candidates are refined in their classrooms.
So I do know of the TPA having different conferences and meetings. Does the Cal TPA have that particular mechanism yet? Or I would assume they have something, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, they do. And does EdFast have that as well? Fast, I'm sorry.
I mean, yeah, because it's all institutions, so.
So Cal TPA does have like an annual conference or something like that?
They have, well, there's not an annual conference, but there's sessions that are held for the CTC, by the CTC for program coordinators, for example.
Okay.
There's also the Meredith Fellows Performance
Yeah, that's
Assessment Conference.
true. Yes.
And so I think that one of the interesting things here is, but that doesn't include candidates, right? So there's, this is expanding the scope of participation.
And mentor teachers.
Mentor teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Vanessa.
Thank you. I'm not, can you explain the specific differences between recommendation 1 and recommendation 2? Is it that recommendation 2 is specific to data and recommendation 1 is not?
It looks like so I'm reading on the PDF that we have here, and recommendation 1 is diverse collaborative convening in general, so making sure everyone's participating in it. Recommendation 2 is collaborative examination of candidate data for articulation.
And the other piece of the first recommendation is that it's multi-directional. It's not one directional.
Right.
Juliet, it seems like 1 is more like state level convenings, whereas 2 is very much program specific. Programs
Thank you.
and employers together.
Could I ask, maybe in recommendation one, the data is still available for review during the statewide as well?
I think there is on bullet point, can you go back to number recommend or there, analyze recent assessment
Oh,
results.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so any other questions or comments about that particular recommendation before we move on to the next one? All right, then we will move on.
Recommendation 3, the RDI-TPA work groups recommends that there's a collaborative scoring overview required for all educators involved in the preparation of new teachers. This training is not as extensive as scores training, but it engages educators with the process of examining the program's own candidates' evidence vis-a-vis the TPA rubrics. Ideally, it occurs during the first year of the educator. It's part of the preparation program. This recommendation is necessary to improve educators' understanding of evidence and practice in order to support their candidates' preparation, as well as candidates' analysis of their practice. It will also facilitate the collaborative examination of candidates' work recommended above. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by requiring CTC or assessment sponsors to support this training via gatherings, materials, ellipsis.
Any comments or questions about that recommendation? Hearing none, we shall move it along.
It's the end.
So with that, it is now time for public comments. So are there any public comments? All right, the public comment phase is now closed. And with that,
Just to say that, you know, I have the poll for focus area 1 complete, and I'll circulate it with a sort of a after meeting email, and you'll have a week, you know, to think about it. Commissioner Brown likes to describe her thought process as a crock pot, so there'll be some time to put the ingredients in there and think, and then there's going to be, of course, the feedback option for each of the recommendations. Both of these.
okay, let's go ahead and break for 10 minutes and then we will reconvene. So we'll reconvene at 2:20.
We put them out in stages so that you're overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed by the.
Sure.
We have 3 online. And is you? Yep.
Oh, we good.
Josh just jumped on. And there's Rebecca. All right, so with that, we will go ahead and continue with our meeting. So next is item 4B, and item 4B pertains to truly the is that word? Pertains to the design standards, the assessment design standards. And with us here today is Juliet from Fresno State, and we've invited her here to highlight the local scoring option and how that takes place at Fresno State University. And so I refer you to the handouts that you've received, and I'm going to provide you with just a little bit of time to read through that with a particular eye toward item 2E, 2F, and 2G before we get started with the presentation.
We're going to review.
Okay, we have time to review first.
Really, about how much more time do you think you need? You're good. Okay. All right. And with that, we will turn it over to Juliet. Come on over.
And then I'm going to. All right, everybody see that? Everybody hear me okay? Excellent. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of what local scoring looks like at Fresno State. Feel free to jump in with any questions. Hopefully I have the answers for you. So first off, what does localized scoring look like at Fresno State? Just a quick overview of the structure. If we think of this in RDI-TPA terms, we call them our tasks, or we call them the site visitation project and the teaching sample project, essentially 2 cycles. That site visitation project, smaller in scope, it's completed in the first semester of clinical practice. It contains 3 tasks, each with its own rubric. The final semester of clinical practice, candidates complete the teaching sample project. It includes 7 tasks, each with its own rubric. So who scores the fast? For the site visitation project, that is really or predominantly scored by candidates' own coaches. So if I am the supervisor for a candidate, I score their SVP. That for sure is the case with the multiple subject and education specialist programs. Within the single subject, it is some discipline-specific faculty. Looking at the data from last semester, that primarily happens in our agricultural education program. But in other disciplines, it's pretty similar. It's lecturers, coaches scoring their own candidates. With the TSP, these are randomly assigned, scored by coaches and faculty. And when I say that discipline specific, that means people who are housed in departments outside of our School of Education because of how single subject is structured. So if any questions on there, feel free to ask. And so here is a breakdown of what that looked like last semester. Can you see that okay? One thing I want to add in there is that we did have our pilot literacy performance assessment. That is what we are referring to as our revised site visitation project. Had a little more faculty involvement in that because we had faculty involved in the development of that process. But you can see multiple subject, 119 projects submitted, 23 coaches scored. And then if you look here at the teaching sample projects, even though we do have some faculty involvement, it's predominantly coaches who are doing the scoring. Yes, sir.
The discipline specific, so you're saying someone in the mathematics professor, not mathematics education and the grade.
Well, so it's somebody who is housed in the math department who does math education. Does that make sense? So the way there's actually been a big shift on our campus in the last just like semester and a half. But historically, what happened is we had our single subject program that was housed within the School of Education and Human Development. But then for each discipline, the methods course was taught by a math, like for example, in math, it was taught by a math education person housed in the math department.
They did have teaching experience.
Yes, yes. So, and they were involved in the program teaching courses. Yeah. Any other questions on that? Okay. Scores are calibrated. The score calibration is led by the FAST coordinator. It's held in person. Everyone who scores must be calibrated annually. They must score within 1 score point on each rubric on the selected sample projects. Individuals new to scoring, they attend an orientation, which includes a walkthrough of the project with a group scoring, talking through what's there, what do you see, where do you score it, why, that whole process before the calibration.
An in-person orientation?
Yes,
or
yes.
blended?
Scoring all done in one setting on one day, because it looked like it's about 5 per.
Okay, not anymore. Pre-COVID, scoring would happen. It would be like an all day, you'd be invited, you'd get provided lunch. Then when COVID happened, it got all dispersed. Now it's a little bit of a combination. We've tried to hold like some sessions where, you get your assignment. It also used to be done all paper and pencil. Now it's done through our data management system. And so people do get assigned. They don't have to come in person, but to try and, I guess, kind of create a little bit more collegiality around it. Say, come for, this 3-hour block on this evening, we'll provide snacks, that sort of thing. Maintaining reliability in the scoring. 15% of the teaching sample projects are double scored. The scores must be within 1 score point. Then some challenges with our current model. I had to add this part in based on conversations over the last 2 days. Candidates do only get their scores. And that's been a complaint for a long time from our candidates, that they don't receive substantive feedback. If a candidate doesn't pass, then they do attend a session led by the FAST coordinator, where she talks about problems and things they might address. But if you pass, you don't get any feedback other than your scores and knowing you passed. I feel like there's little faculty participation. As you saw, it's primarily scored by coaches. So that means people who are teaching the courses may or may not read with the tasks. There's no additional compensation provided for scoring. And it's built into the job responsibilities for our coaches, kind of how we get around that. But I think that's also one of the barriers to faculty participation. I realize I'm going on public record saying this, but faculty will often say, oh yeah, I want to help out with scoring. But then when the time actually comes, we don't necessarily see a lot of people stepping up to do that. It's at the end of the semester, it's time intensive, I'm also actually pretty concerned about bias in the SVP scoring. And I think that's an area that needs to be addressed. So, and because a lot of these systems were established before I really got involved with the administration, I don't know where that came from, that coaches scored their own SVPs or their own candidates SVPs. I imagine actually it might be part of the formative piece in thinking like, if I'm scoring my candidates, I can give them that feedback. But and also thinking that the TSP, because it comes at the end, is more of a summative assessment, but I don't know for sure. So that's all I have.
So I'm wondering, like, how do you monitor the system, or how do you ensure that the system is monitoring things like interrater
relatability? Well, that's part of the double scoring.
Okay. And so, like, what is your mechanism to monitor the system? How do you monitor that? How do you know if there's a breakdown in inter-rater reliability or something of that nature?
So we do the psychometric analyses where, the projects are double scored. We're checking to make sure the scores are in alignment. If they're out of alignment, then they're going for a third score.
And who does that for you?
It's our coordinator. And then we have a faculty member who does the statistics.
And so that would, if we were to shift to a local scoring option, that would necessitate that every institution have an equivalent who can do that.
Probably. Okay. And I saw
Alicia's hand, but then it went down. She's good. She's okay.
Thanks, Matt.
If any comments, feedback do you have from the actual scores?
I actually do have those. Like, what kinds of feedback do you mean?
And what are the thoughts about doing it? Are they?
It's mixed.
I'll say some get a lot out of it. We actually just did, so we've been playing with how to collect data from the scorers because I actually don't find the data that they provide us. Like, when I look at the scores, okay, a lot of our candidates scores 2s, right? So it's a holistic score on that rubric. It's a 2. Well, I want to know what area of that rubric are they maybe struggling on. Is there an area of that rubric where they are stronger, an area where they're weaker? So we tried creating kind of like a double system and asking coaches we created like a Google survey or a Google form so that they would provide a score on each band of the rubric as well as a holistic score, just as a way to collect better data. But people forgot to do it. It was just kind of clunky and it was overly burdensome to the people scoring. So we said, okay, that didn't work out so well. So we tried then last semester creating just a survey at the end. I mean, ideally everybody would come together and we'd score and then we'd have kind of a group conversation. Like, what did you see? And so this time we did a survey to scorers and asked them to share what were the areas of strength, what were the areas of challenge, comments, that sort of thing. I can pull those results up if you are interested. But I just have to laugh because there's one person, and I know exactly who it is, who said, you shouldn't be doing this. They should take the state assessment.
I guess I'm wondering, since with the first one, I don't know the acronym, sorry, but the ones that's primarily scored by coaches.
SVP, yeah.
Yeah, so do any of them left comments or said that this has helped inform their supervision work? Or
Had that feedback from people. Yeah, and I did just trying to do some research on this, probably, I'm trying to remember, it was a year and a half ago. At the end of the year, a survey of coaches and faculty asking about their level of participation with the FAST, what they've done, and to what extent that participation had then informed their work. That was a big piece, that yes, when they're scoring, it helps inform the work they do with subsequent candidates.
it'd be helpful to see that, not right now, because we're today, but
that might be some of the data I shared.
Not for homework.
Previously. I think I actually shared it with Adam previously. So some of those score results.
Are those coaches also involved in implementing multiple measures? So could a coach, for example, or a TPA for a candidate they're working with, but also go and give an evaluation for the teaching placement?
Oh, absolutely. They're required to do both.
So they're doing both and you have a separate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So have you attempted yet to correlate?
No. No, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't even thought about it, but yeah.
Correlation, but you also might find out that it would bolster the question. I think you raised about bias. You said bias.
Right.
So what's your concern about bias and what should we all be concerned about in terms of local scoring?
My concern is about coaches who are passing their candidates because this is a good teacher. I'm going to make sure they pass. And I would actually be concerned about those individuals doing that with clinical practice evaluations as well.
That's a feeling, or you have evidence?
I don't have concrete evidence. I have a feeling.
Thank you for being so transparent and vulnerable with us.
I was gonna ask you, like, the coaches, like, what is for your coaches that you hire, is there a process if you need, like, their bias, like how you get them out? I'm using hand signals here.
It's really challenging.
Like the school system. That was Patricia, sorry. For online people.
Other questions?
I don't have, this is Adam. I don't have a question. It's more of just a thought, which is it may be interesting. And this is just, looking at the local scoring, this is just an introduction to the conversation ahead of the development of brainstorm ideas and recommendations. But it's almost like an interesting case of, well, what if local scoring were the paradigm, what sort of centralized supports or supports could be provided that would help the implementation of local scoring? I don't know if I have, I don't know if that's a question, but it's just
resources.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think, in fact, my perspective on that would be that you would need a technical assistance team of some kind that could actually support all the various institutions on questions that we're raising, like bias, training, greater drift, greater reliability. There's a lot of issues that could get support from a team coming from the state to help out all the folks who don't have local statisticians or local psychometricians. So I think that's a really right way to be looking at it. If you're really going to support the possibility of local. There are also TPAs that are being envisioned right now as we speak, new TPAs, new models. I'm sure there's going to be more flowers blooming as we go into the future. So I think it's a question of a level playing field for some of us. Some of those places will have all the support you're describing, whereas the state could play an equalizing role by providing that technical support for campuses. We don't have the foundation support to do it.
And that may be partially why institutions have not accepted the charge or the option to score locally.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in New York, where all institutions were charged with creating their own performance assessments.
Your professional opinion. And so it looked like there was the ratio for the first one was about 8 per coach. I think that's the word you use. You're gonna go back to that.
I am there.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at single subject too. Maybe I don't know. I don't know what the ratio is. Never mind. Whatever the ratio is. Hey, I'm not a calculator. Okay, so let's just say it's 8, for example. And if you were to add the actual feedback to the work that
I know that would.
Candidates were doing, would you, in your professional opinion, would you want ideally more scores or more time or neither in order to make that happen?
Both. More scores and more time.
I'm just, when I think about local scoring, I get concerned about the original intent of having a TPA that created a so-called level playing field in terms of equity of preparation programs across making sure that all candidates had access to programs that met the same standards. And so I wonder if we, how to enable a localized scoring thing that still ensures that programs are able to be not just competitive, but to be accountable to the licensure requirement to make sure that we are, preparing candidates equitably. I guess, that's just a thought. Because I feel like the original intent of, when the TPA, the pact way back when, was to create a more level playing field and to ensure that all programs across, the California state had preparation programs that were meeting the standard.
But the pact was locally scored.
Well, yeah, that was local scoring.
And we still have to demonstrate that these assessments meet the TPEs and align with the assessment design standards. It still has to get reviewed by the commission.
I was just gonna ask. I don't know a good way of asking it, so I'll just be direct. Like, if you hadn't developed the fence.
Yeah.
So if you did not have the instrument that you had made, would you be using local scoring as an institution, or would you defer knowing the pros and cons?
I have no idea. I mean, it's so hard for me to even answer that because I fell into a system that had it.
Right. But that means it's from what I'm hearing, it's kind of a toss up for you if it was worth it.
I mean, I think we gain a lot by doing this.
That's true. Okay.
As I said, and the people who are involved in the scoring talk about how it helps them to see. Like, I can tell you from scoring projects that we need to do more work in our courses on developing candidates' understanding of how to create clear learning objectives. It's clearly an area that we are not doing a good job on because I see it in multiple projects that I score. Would I have that knowledge if I wasn't in there scoring? I don't know.
quick question, Juliet, and looking at, do your coaches teach classes or is it the faculty? Because if you're saying faculty is not as involved, then they're not seeing the scores, then they're not.
Exactly.
Changes.
Exactly. And then, another challenge that we have at a CSU, at least 2/3 of our courses in each program are taught by non-tenure track faculty. And so they aren't necessarily available to come in and participate in the scoring.
Contract. Under contract.
They're not
It's in
available.
a union contract. It's not their job description.
It's not within their job description. Right. Yeah, exactly. They are invited, but it's not required. It's not required of tenure track faculty either.
Other questions or comments for Juliet?
Just one, thank you very much for the transparency. It's really helpful to hear how something is being, done currently. It's very interesting to me. This whole concept of localized scoring is very, very interesting to me. Yeah, they are. That's
crazy.
Like, how do you? Just be curious about comparing it to a way that a statewide one that would be used at different institutions and how that would look and how that would be operationalized in terms of, like you say, worrying about the inter-rater reliability, worrying about the bias, because I would really be concerned about, our professors passing their candidates. I really would be concerned about that.
This is I think this was a perfect sort of trailhead for this discussion, in terms of, looking at, because I hear the tension, and then also and we're here to make recommendations to the state entity about how we might facilitate this. And then the other piece about how do we have the benefits of local scoring where you're connected to the work of the candidate that can be folded back into the cycle of instruction. And at the same time, attend to the reliability and attend to the validity. And, is there perhaps, as in some other countries, is there a hybrid system where you're locally scoring and then you're having a certain amount that are pulled up for centralized moderation? I mean, there are a lot of really interesting, and this is one of the areas that I know that I'm breaking form here and having, content thoughts, but to be transparent on the pre-K-12 side, I was very deep into performance assessment in the rollout of Smarter Balanced. And, I think there's an interesting opportunity here for the minds in this room to really envision a system where you're getting the benefits and as well as taking perhaps some of the burden off of the local, so that it's not, there's not a Susie doing the amount of work that a Susie does. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be rich.
Thank you, Juliet. Is it now time for public comment?
We won't do the whole item, or we won't do this is just an FYI. So the other part that we're going to take up in the near future is looking at the program completer surveys to understand candidate experience of programmatic support for assessment completion. And we're not gonna do this today because I get the sense that everybody's pretty drained. But Fifi has done. Fifi Lau, who was at the beginning of our meeting yesterday, shared the accreditation data dashboard with us. Has dashboards and can show us the dashboards for program completer surveys. And then Marissa Luna Lopez, who does work for the Commission on Cal-TPA, has also shared the questions that people who complete the Cal-TPA are asked. And so those are all shared with you in paper form. They're also hyperlinked to the item because we are going to be asked to think about what is it that we want to know. What is it that we want to know from candidates to help improve the system?
Just one quick thing. And I talked to Reg about this, but I just wanted to say that there's also a focus group that happens after the pilot and the field test. And I think it would be informative for this group to see what those questions are that are asked to the candidates and to the mentor teacher supporting candidates while they take the pilot and the field test of the newly designed one. So I think that would be helpful to see those questions.
Test questions as well. Absolutely. Great idea. More of a to be continued, that one. And I think we can go to public comment.
All right, we will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to make a comment, please notify the meeting moderator, hitting a request card or by clicking on the raised hand icon if participating through Zoom or pressing *9 if you're participating by phone. Comment is limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Are there any public comments? Right, the public comment period for this item is now closed. Moving on to item 5B, closing remarks. Are there closing remarks from representatives of the commission?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Safe travels home, wherever that might be. And our thoughts, I know, are with the people of Southern California. And shout out to first responders to put that out there. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Mrs. Rennet Schreier, are any comments? No.
So I just want to make sure that I have the right sort of follow-ups for you all. I have the request from Tina about the accreditation design dashboard environment to look around. Fifi has already provided the link, and so I will share that out with the sort of wrap-up email. Then we have the question about about the performance assessments, being able to sort of poke around, look at them. I have good news and bad news on that. We have the templates, which provide the prompts, and you can kind of see what the candidate sees. And for RDI-TPA, we have the templates are embedded in the handbook. So there will be a combination, apologies in advance, of handbooks and templates in that. And then Marissa's provided kind of the full scope for RDI-TPA. And then Juliet is gonna show, you've already shared with me the FAST resources. So you'll get a full complement of the things to take a look at. You will receive a poll for focus area 1 that includes a space to provide feedback on each of the recommendations. You'll receive the same for focus area 2. We are asking for a 1-week turnaround on that. The reason being that the chairs, Mandy Redfern and Ursula Estrada Ruelas, will be co-presenting with me to the commission. And so we have to get our item together. And so the deadlines start to creep in, and that's why we're asking for a week turnaround. And then finally, Kathy, the field test questions and some of the information around that will be provided to you as well to help with the next steps. Other than that, appreciation for dealing with me and my time limits and my warm demanding. I like to think it's warm demanding, maybe. But I'm just grateful for the cognitive lift and the interaction and engagement process. Grateful for you all.
And with that, I now adjourn the January 2025 RDI-TPA Workgroup meeting. The next meeting is on February the 26th and 27th. And I look forward to seeing you then. Safe travels.
Still working through my Santa's direction.